The story begins with the narration that Chunnan High School for Girls is very famous. She is famous not only for her good education, but also for her excellent students. Ordinary people, and especially boys, consider this Chunnan Girls' School a paradise on earth. Last year, the school unexpectedly changed its main rule and now began to recruit boys. A document was signed on the proposal for the admission of young men to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. It was written there that during the last board of directors there was a discussion of the project changes in the system of admission of students to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School, put forward by the school directors Lai Song. During the negotiations, the council unanimously approved the proposed project. The changes were supposed to take effect from the beginning of the new academic year. However, the students were not satisfied with this development of events, and therefore they began to get rid of the guys in all possible ways. Rumors about the terrible things that were happening at Chunnan High School with the guys quickly spread throughout the neighborhood. And it was since then that the school was divided into two parts, good and bad, turning into a paradise for girls, and a living hell for guys. However, ironically, another poor unfortunate guy was transferred to Chunnan High School. And from now on, either hell or heaven awaits him among all female students. The events begin in the city of Chunnan. A young man, out of breath, is trying to hide from two guys who are chasing him. It turns out that one of them is called Hong Kai-yong, and he has short dark hair, and he wears a t-shirt on his body. The guy slows down, stopping, and loudly asks the second friend about the direction in which the thief ran. A young man in a white shirt running in front, whose name is Feng Qin, also stops, then turns his body to his comrade and hurries to answer that the thief turned into an alley. After that, the guy asks Hong Kai-yong if they will wait for the others. The short-haired guy snorts at this and says that of course they can do it together, without anyone's help. Feng Qin, a little embarrassed, will ask his friend to be careful, because suddenly the thief has a weapon with him. After a while, the guy who is a thief is standing in front of the wall, and is about to climb over it, when a dissatisfied voice is heard from behind him, the owner of which asked where he lathered up. The thief stopped abruptly, not even having time to grab the wall, and turned around. It was obvious that he did not expect to be caught up so quickly, and was scared. Behind him were the same two guys, Hong Kai-yong and Feng Qin, the second of whom hurried to tell the thief to return what he had stolen earlier. Then the thief, who was an emo from the Forgotten Love Club, completely turned around and said that a couple of unsuccessful schoolchildren would not be able to stop him, since he was a member of the Forgotten Love family. The thief had multicolored hair consisting of 3 colors, black, brown, and green, and the guy had a star on his cheek. The thief suddenly began to move his whole body, as if he wanted to perform a dance. He said he was going to show the guys what a real artist looks like. Then he asked me to take a look at his smooth movements and charisma. And in the end, he began to ask the guys that they were definitely scared, so they were afraid and trembling. The thief told the guys to run, so be it, before he trampled them with his talent. Here Feng Qin could not stand it and shouted that he would now show talent, while calling the artist unfinished. The young men took off and ran straight at the thief. Hong Kai-yong was the first to strike, loudly saying that the thief had already got him. After that, the guys gave a good lesson to the thief with colorful hair, hitting several times and even kicking, so that the thief even asked to stop and begged to stop. When the guys were about to leave, Hong Kai-yong said with displeasure and frustration that he had soiled his recently purchased clothes. Feng Qin smiled sweetly at these words, saying that she would definitely wash off, and offered to go and find the others. When the young men were walking leisurely along the dark street, suddenly someone jumped out from behind the wall. It was a girl with a square of white hair and an orange blouse. She saw the guys a long time ago, and began to wait for the right moment for her appearance. Standing around the corner of the building, the girl was very funny that she almost gave herself away. After the blonde jumped out, she first turned to brother Feng and Yong, asking if they had finished yet. This girl's name was Da Bai, but her real name was Fanjia Zhu. She winked at the guys and her face broke into a sweet smile. Da Bai hurried to congratulate them, saying that they coped quite quickly. At the same time, the girl was holding a book in one hand and a thick brush in the other. The guys were confused at first because of the unexpected appearance of Da Bai, but then one of them said that they had caught only one thief, and the second escaped. After that, the 3 of them continued walking. First of all, Feng Qin asked the girl where she and another person had disappeared. Da Bai replied that she hid to see with her own eyes the feet of brother Feng. Feng Qin said it sounded a little creepy, and then asked where Xuan Xin was. This guy just disappeared with Da Bai. The blonde hurried to answer that she did not know for sure, but assumed that the young man was probably hitting on some girl again. All this time, while Feng Qin and Da Bai were having a dialogue, Hong Kai-yong was walking a little way behind, not interfering in the conversation in any way. It was evident from his sad face that those two seemed to have forgotten about his existence. Feng Qin was embarrassed, smiling, and asked again about hitting on the girl. The blonde sharply stared ahead, then put out her hand and began pointing her finger at the guy standing a couple of meters away, and the left girl with pink hair pulled into ponytails. At the same time, Da Dai shouted to the whole street that it was Xuanzin. Xuanzin, who had hair like Da Bai, was standing right in front of a girl with delicate pink hair, and looked at her with a soft, warm gaze of admiration. The young man took her hand, brought it to his face and kissed it gently. The guy asked the girl not to worry, as his people will soon return her bag. She was embarrassed in response, blushed and looked away at the floor. Xuanzin continued to scold her and offered to go out for a drink before the others returned. The girl looked up at the guy again, her mouth slightly open in surprise and her eyes rounded with joy. Feng Qin and Hong Kai-yong stood together, frowning, and glared at this sugary couple with a dissatisfied look. Then abruptly they exploded from the spot and flew up to Xuanzin, starting to beat him. Feng Qin first of all loudly asked the blonde about what he had arranged here. Xuanzin did not understand such an explosive reception of the guys and began to beg for forgiveness and begging to stop. He was lying on the ground, while the young men kicked him to the most I don't want, so the blonde was clearly in pain. After that, one of the guys handed the bag to the girl with pink hair and then asked what her name was. She bowed in gratitude for the returned item, and then said that her name was Han Yuding. It turned out that the girl was a student of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. Han Yuding hesitated and was embarrassed, and then thanked the guys for helping her return the bag. A girl with pink hair, putting her hand to her chest, asked if she could invite them all to dinner. At this suggestion, Feng Qin smiled kindly and said that they had not done anything special. The young man continued to tell Han Yuding to come home as soon as possible, since it had been dark for a long time. And besides, it was late. At that moment, Da Bai screamed with joy and began to shout that, by the way, she had independently written a small poem about the feat of Brother Feng. The blonde, looking with her huge pleading eyes, asked if the young men wanted to listen. All three guys stood rooted to the spot and didn't know what to say. The only thing that could be seen was that they were clearly not eager. Hong Kai-yong actually said out loud in a voice of complete dissatisfaction that he actually also participated in this feat of catching and chasing a thief. Then Da Bai began to enthusiastically read out her little poem about the feat of her brother. It was impossible to make out her entire monologue, as she screamed with joy from time to time, squinting her eyes, laughing heartily, and then blushing all over her face. The only thing that the three young men understood from all this was that Brother Feng said about some kind of moonlight dance. Feng Qin was the first to raise his voice, asking the guys to kill him. Hong Kai-yong then said that he hoped that the end of this little poem would be soon. And Xuanzin shouted at all that he couldn't stand it for more than a minute. At that moment, all three of them simultaneously came up with the idea that they needed to get out of here. Xuanzin was the first to take action and began to run away. Without warning anyone and without really saying goodbye to anyone, the young man abruptly blew up with all his might and ran to the side. At the same time, he shouted that he had actually forgotten to turn off the iron and hoped that the hut had not burned down. Feng Qin and Hong Kai-yong clearly did not expect such a setup from a friend, so they were shocked. The second one abruptly figured out what to do, while using the example of Xuanzin. The young man also ran like a bullet in the opposite direction, finally saying that he had just remembered that his girlfriend was cheating on him and the guy needed to go. That's when Feng Qin was left alone, or rather one-on-one with the blonde. Da Bai was unhappy with what was happening and angry at the guys, while looking in the direction of the recently retreating back. But then Feng Qin decided to add fuel to the fire and was about to say that he also needed it, but did not have time to finish. He was interrupted by a blonde who turned around sharply and came closer to the young man. The girl came closer to Feng Qin and stopped a meter away, while starting to look at the guy with huge eyes the color of the universe. It was visible. For no reason at all, Da Bai admired the young man, because her eyebrows flew up, her mouth rounded, and her eyes sparkled. Da Bai flew up to the guy and hugged him with all her might. The blonde hugged the young man tightly, while saying that, as she thought, only he could appreciate her talent. Feng Qin was confused, not knowing how to react. There was only one thought in his head, that it was worth sounding the alarm. The young man, trying to smile as friendly as possible, had already begun to explain what, to tell the truth, he already needed, but again he did not have time to finish. This time the guy was interrupted by a phone call from his mobile. It was Feng Qin's mom. The young man immediately picked up the phone, anxiously asking about what had happened. From the other end of the phone, from the mother's side, it was heard that Feng Qin should be home as soon as possible, because they were in trouble. Mom was clearly worried about what was happening, which can be seen from her fast, loud, and collected speech. The blonde, who was standing opposite, began to sniff, and tears began to gather in the corners of her eyes. The girl pursed her lips, the edges of which sank down from sadness. Feng Qin dropped the call and told the blonde that he urgently needed to run home, while feeling a little guilty and scratching his head. Da Bai, in turn, first called the young man by name, and then blew a kiss. The guy was more embarrassed than ever, opening his mouth, and hurried to take a step back and say for the last time that he needed to run. Feng Qin took off from the place where he was standing and flew like a bullet towards his house, leaving Da Bai alone on the street. The girl waved her palm at the retreating back of the guy, who, for the record, never turned around. Also, the young man left behind a broken heart, in connection with which the blonde frowned and shouted into the void that Brother Feng was a complete fool. After that, the story begins about the main character, about Feng Qin. First, it is said that there are 4 members in the young man's family: mom, dad, he and a younger sister. They are not particularly rich, and even less famous, but at the same time they have a very calm, cozy and happy family life. At this moment, Feng Qin jumps over the fence of the building, rushing home with all his legs at the first call of his mother. Finally reaching the front wooden door, the young man nervously tried to put the key in the door opening and scroll. But in connection with that I was very nervous, almost nothing came out. The front door finally succumbed to Feng Qin and let him enter the house. The guy first of all shouted to mom and dad, notifying that he was back. The young man quickly crossed the corridor and found himself in the living room, in which both parents were sitting on a small soft sofa. The guy immediately got down to business and asked directly about what happened. The father was the first to raise his voice and turned to his son. At first, he apologized in an extremely sad voice, and then said that the young man had just turned 18, but now the guy himself would have to take care of his mother and sister. Feng Qin did not expect to hear anything like this, so he was very taken aback and fell into a stupor. At that moment, the truth came to Feng Qin. The emotions on his face were quickly replaced by one another. At first, the guy was shocked, then sad, so much so that a wave of tears rolled up. And in the end, the real hysteria began at all. The young man hugged his dad's shoulders with all his might and asked him not to despair ahead of time. Feng Qin began to convince his father that medicine has now stepped far ahead, so they will definitely be able to cure a man's cancer. The young man's tears flowed in 3 streams, not stopping for a second at all. But at the same second, a strong slap hit the guy's face, thanks to which he flew several meters away. The father abruptly said that he was healthy as a bull, while looking at his son with a worried look through thick glasses. Feng Tian got to his feet first, and then asked what the slap was for. Dad answered the question with a question, asking about who buried his father alive. Feng Qin asked again about the fact that Dad was not ill. There was a large mark on the young man's cheek from his father's hand. Then Mom got involved in the conversation, who immediately began to tell that 10 years ago Dad took out a loan of 10 yuan, and forgot to return it. The woman with a sad expression on her face continued to say that now the father owes the bank 1 million yuan. Feng Qin immediately began to shout about what kind of fierce interest it was, and where at least his father managed to get it, not in a bank at a bus stop. Dad calmly continued to talk, while adjusting his glasses, that in order to pay off the loan, he decided to go to Afghanistan for coconuts. The man began to add that you can earn good money on all this, but, unfortunately, it is very dangerous. Dad finally asked Feng Qin to look after his mom and sister while he was away. The young man raised his voice, saying that it was very dangerous, and asking if there was no other option to pay off this debt. Then his father's face broke into a happy smile, which made the guy have a bad feeling. The father put one hand on his son's shoulder and, calling him his boy, said that he always knew that he could rely on him. Here the young man was definitely confused, even a little scared. After that, Mom continued to speak for Dad's place, that there is something that the guy is able to do. Feng Qin nodded weakly and smiled gently. He cautiously asked what he should do then. Then Dad answered first, tilting his head and blushing a little, that the young man just needed to transfer to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. Feng Qin, without understanding the essence of the question, immediately asked about how the transfer could help with the loan. But then everything slowly came to the young man, and the guy asked his parents to repeat where he should transfer, to which they immediately repeated the previous answer. Feng Qin asked again about Chunnan High School for Girls, then so loudly that it rang out not only to the whole apartment building, but also to the whole neighborhood. The actions of the chapter begin in the same place where they ended, that is, at the home of the young man Feng Qin. The guy is in a state of complete shock, after his parents offered him to transfer to another school, with the senior female. Feng Qin tries not to lose his temper and keep his composure, so he squints and, pointing at his parents with his hand, asks how his transfer to Chunnan will help with the payment of his father's debt. Feng Qin's mother kindly smiles and winks, while in response pointing at her son with her index finger, says that the headmistress of the senior girls' school, Chunnan, used to be her classmate. Then she continued that she said that if the young man studies there, he will definitely receive a very good and large scholarship. Feng Qin's dad, who was standing next to Mom, agrees with his wife, nodding his head. His hands are folded on his chest, ostensibly in a pose of confidence. The father adds to the mother's words that the guy, on top of everything else, if he agrees to the transfer, then the senior girls' school of Chunnan will accept Lan. And then he says with a huge smile on his face that it's all completely free. The parents sat down on the sofa together again, and Mom continued to say that in the end they would not only get rid of their father's debt, but also allow Lan to get a good education. She starts laughing out loud, clapping her hands at the same time, as if a wonderful idea has come to her head, from which she is so delighted. The father, who is sitting with his arms still folded on his chest, nods and agrees, agreeing that Mom is absolutely right. Then they both jump up sharply and begin to waltz. The father put one hand on his wife's back and the other wrapped around her palm, thereby creating the shape of a boat. Then they begin to spin and also laugh joyfully, bursting into laughter. Mom, who is still dancing in Dad's arms, begins to talk out loud about the fact that Chunnan High School for Girls is the most elite educational institution, and when their son and father graduate, he will definitely become the director of some big company. The woman adds that after that Feng Qin should find a beautiful and rich wife, and then, after all this, they will all be so happy together. Feng Qin stood to the side, while looking at the parents' speech unfolding in front of him. The young man, scratching his chin, thinks about the fact that if Lan studies at the Chunnan Senior Girls' School, she will really be able to get a good education, which means this whole idea sounds pretty good, besides tempting. At this point, the parents stop dancing and having fun. Tears abruptly gushed from his father's eyes in 3 streams. He begins to sob softly and cover his mouth with his palm, shuddering while crying. Dad suddenly says that that is, the parents, have no right to decide something for Feng Qin, and even more so to force him. The man clenches one palm into a fist in a decisive gesture and says that he would rather go to Afghanistan himself for these coconuts. Crystal tears also come to my mother's eyes, looking at her husband's condition and hearing such touching words. The woman groans and presses her palm to her mouth. Feng Qin can't stand this scene, grabs his head, squints his eyes hard, and says at the top of his voice that okay, so be it. He agrees to transfer to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The father is already wiping away tears, from which the trace has disappeared, and grins. He says that he never doubted his beloved son and knew that he would not let him down, while referring to Feng Qin. The young man only inhales sadly at this, looking somewhere through with a serious look, clearly thinking about something. Dad takes a few steps and stops a meter away from his son when he says that the headmistress of the senior girls' school, Chunnan, also asked the guy to come to her tomorrow morning. At the same time, the man again points at the young man with his finger. Feng Qin frowns and asks loudly. He doesn't understand how the headmistress could have known in advance that the guy would agree, if he didn't even know a word about transferring to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. But at this moment, the father adds fuel to the fire, and says that the young man should not forget his suitcase, since together with his mother they have already collected all the guy's things. The man's face breaks into a satisfied smile again, and he gives a thumbs up. Feng Qin is very surprised by what he has heard and understands that his parents have planned and thought it all out carefully for a long time, and were absolutely sure that the guy would agree. He walks sadly down the corridor of the apartment, heading to his room. The young man goes into his thoughts and thinks that it looks like his parents are really evicting him. When the guy opens the door, he scrolls in his head that tomorrow morning it will be necessary to go to the headmistress of the senior girls' school Chunnan. Feng Qin thinks that all the events in his life somehow began to change one after another too quickly, which is why he cannot have time to analyze and realize everything. The young man enters the room and sees a blue suitcase standing in the middle of the room. The guy freezes and realizes that his father was not joking at all, and he and his mother really collected all his things. Feng Qin goes to the back of the room and sits down in a comfortable leather chair at the desk. The young man, covering one of his eyes, presses the light switch on the table lamp and again goes deep into his thoughts. The guy's thoughts are completely absorbed by the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. He suddenly remembers one rainy day about 5 months ago. Feng Qin walked leisurely along the gray and wet street under a black umbrella, yawning at the same time. Opposite, the guy, or rather, the will of what he was walking, was located just the same Chunnan Senior Girls' School. For no reason at all, the young man suddenly heard someone's cries for help. A guy with short pink hair was standing at the metal fence grating, shouting loudly and asking for help. Then, abruptly, a girl with bright red hair that was pulled into ponytails appeared behind that young man. She sharply hit the guy in the face with a heavy slap, but with such force that he flew off. And then the girl grabbed the young man by the scruff of his black jacket and dragged him along the ground back to the doors of the school. He did not even try to resist, just continued to howl and scream. Feng Qin, who was standing on the other side of the fence, that is, outside the territory of Chunnan Senior Girls' School, and was in a state of shock. The young man could not believe his eyes from the picture he had just seen, trying to understand what had happened to that poor guy and a strong girl. But he never found an explanation. Then Feng Qin returns to his memories a little later, already 4 months ago. The young man walked along the same road past the Chunnan Senior Girls' School, and yawned again, trying to cover his wide-open mouth with his palm at least a little. And at that moment, just like the last time, he heard a cry for help from the same place. Now some blonde man was standing at the fence and was screaming heart-rending, saying that he did not want to die. Then Feng Qin turned to look at him and thought to himself that this was happening again. A girl with a square immediately appeared behind the guy with white hair, who abruptly grabbed him by the collar and threw him to the ground. The girl with the square loudly asked the blonde that he tried to just run away after looking at their president. Feng Qin's mouth widened in surprise, and his eyebrows flew up high when he realized that this poor kid was just another unlucky one like the last one. Feng Qin does not stop there, but on the contrary recalls the events that took place 3 months ago. The young man walks along the same sidewalk again, yawning as usual. Then he will see how a guy in a suit climbed a stone fence and joyfully shouts to the whole street that he will live. At the same time, he bursts into tears, but smiles. But it wasn't there. A brown thick rope lands on the guy's neck from somewhere behind, like a rope. She wraps a knot around him and tightens, because of which the young man begins to choke, and then yell at the top of his voice. After that, he flies like a stone from the fence and falls to the ground, while breaking, becoming a puddle of scarlet blood. Feng Qin gets the most scared and looks dumbfounded at the guy's body, thinking about what is going on here. Feng Qin finally returns to reality from his not-so-pleasant memories. He realizes the seriousness of the situation only now, when he realizes that he will just have to study in this terrible and cursed place for a whole school year. The young man is abruptly illuminated by the fact that it is necessary to immediately inform about the transfer to the Chunnan Land Senior Girls' School. Feng Qin comes to another room and knocks on its door, which has a pink heart-shaped sign with the inscription of the name Lan. After a couple of seconds, the door opens with a slight creak and a girl appears in the doorway. She has blue-black hair and large eyes of the same color. The first thing she asks Feng Qin, who is her brother, what he needed. Feng Qin looks down at the floor and says quietly that it looks like they are both transferring to Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The girl chuckles at this and says that she already knows, since her parents hurried to tell her right away. At the same time, the doe does not look happy with the news, but on the contrary, dissatisfied and gloomy like a cloud before a downpour. Before closing the door, Lan asks Feng Qin, as if by the way, not to call her sister at school. Then the girl adds that the reason for this is that she does not want to have anything to do with the killer. The young man completely hung his head at this remark, thinking that it looks like the deer is still angry at him. The guy understands that it's better for him to leave, so he turns around on his toes and walks away. And when he is already far away, the door of the doe's room opens slightly and a girl sticks her head out. She just quietly looks at her brother's retreating back, and he never saw it. The events begin among the students of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The girls are like zombies standing on the ground, while rapaciously looking for something on the sides with crazy eyes. They are wearing a torn school uniform, with torn rags sticking out and hanging. Also, they all have long black nails, like the claws of predatory animals. One of the girls, who was standing in front of the others and had pink long hair, suddenly says she wants to eat. She adds that she has already managed to eat 300 guys, but this has not satisfied her hunger and fuse, so she very much wants more. Then the girl looks around, while smacking her lips loudly and savorily. The same girl asks out loud about who will be this 301st guy, and then her crazy gaze stops on someone, and she abruptly leans forward with her whole body, asking that it could be him. At this moment, Feng Qin screams at the top of his voice and opens his eyes. It was a terrible dream, so the guy sits down comfortably on the bed and calmly exhales. His heart is still beating hard and fast, and his pulse is pounding all over his body. The young man tries to convince that this is just another dream. Sweat flows cold from fear through the guy's body that he even wipes his wet forehead with his elbow bent. The young man thinks that what has just been taken away is some kind of devilry, not a dream. At this moment, the voice of one of Feng Qin's parents is heard from the other room, calling his son by name and saying that it's time for him to get ready. The young man rubs his eyes with his fist, rises from the bed and answers the call, which, unfortunately, he remembers everything perfectly. Some time later, Feng Qin is already standing in front of a huge mansion, which is called Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The gates are already open, and the young man is standing near them with his blue suitcase, which his parents have collected for a long time. Two young men in uniform, who are apparently security guards, saw Feng Qin from afar. Both guards turned around, and one of them exclaimed that the young man really wasn't afraid to show up here. Feng Qin was already walking leisurely along the sidewalk leading to the doors of Chunnan Senior Girls' School. At this moment, the men began to groan and wish good luck with a timid smile. One of them even gave advice to be extremely careful. Feng Qin did not understand why such a warm welcome from the guards, and therefore looked around at one, then at the other. The man, who had been whispering with his friend before, again began to say that the young man was such a young boy, and he hoped that he had lived a good and eventful life, but it was a pity that it was so short. And in the end, the guard wished that the earth was Feng Qin down. Here the young man opened his eyes wide and turned around, because he had just been wished a successful afterlife, and 100% predicted an early death. Feng Qin began to think for himself that these guards probably weren't saying serious things, since the guy hadn't done anything wrong. Then, a couple of minutes later, Feng Qin was already walking down the corridor of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School, very out of breath from such a morning physical activity in the form of climbing to a high floor by an ordinary staircase. There are really a lot of floors in this place, so the guy thinks that in the event of an earthquake, the survival rate will definitely be 0. First, Feng Qin stood at the stone wall of the corridor, trying to catch his breath properly, and then approached the office of the headmistress of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The young man knocked on the brown door several times, and when a female voice was heard from inside, who said to come in, the guy went in. The first thing Feng Qin did was ask for forgiveness while walking leisurely around the room. The office turned out to be very bright, and all the furniture and things in it were made in warm colors and shades. The young man, smiling a little, noticed aloud that it was cozy here. Then, from a table standing behind a large desk and with its back turned, a woman's pleasant voice came to the guy, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. The wheelchair immediately spun around, facing Feng Qin, and now a woman with long blonde hair in a red dress appeared on it. Apparently, she was the headmistress of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School, whose name was Lai Song. She waved her hand in a gesture of greeting and greeted kindly, while smiling radiantly. Feng Qin was stunned by Lai Song's beauty and was embarrassed, and his face flushed. He mumbled something like an official greeting in return, and then again gave his name. The headmistress immediately willingly got up from the table, left the desk and went straight to the young man. That's when Feng Qin blushed even more than before, opening his mouth wide in surprise and raising his eyebrows. Lai Song walked up to the guy who was sitting on a light green chair, right next to him and bent down a little, while putting her palms on his shoulders. And after that, for no reason at all, she hugged Feng Qin tightly so that the young man's face was not in the right place. Recoiling a little from the guy, the headmistress hurried to say that he had grown very much and became a real mature man. At that moment, Feng Qin could not stand it anymore and shouted with all his might, asking about what this woman was doing and allowing herself in general. The headmistress stepped back a little and pretended to think, allegedly scratching her chin. She hurried to ask the guy that he apparently forgot that earlier, in childhood, he always hugged his aunt when they met. After that, Lai Song bent down a little again, so that her front part of her body was slightly exposed. Feng Qin involuntarily cast a glance at that place and twisted his face, which, by the way, was red as a ripe tomato. The young man asked about what the headmistress had just said. The blonde replied that it was then that the guy said his first word, while calling Li Sun Mom. After that, the headmistress winked with one eye, and then the remark she had just said reached Feng Qin. He looked dumbfounded at the headmistress and agreed, saying that he remembered now. And then the young man sharply shouted that this definitely did not happen, so loudly that the woman rolled her eyes. Lai Song decided to make the topic of conversation funny right away, and smiled sweetly. The headmistress hastened to say in her own defense that the guy was so excited, and so the aunt decided to just distract him. Feng Qin again loudly asked about this eloquent word distract. The young man confidently concluded that Lai Song was just trying to seduce him. The woman ignored this remark of the guy and handed him a piece of paper, apparently some kind of document. Lee soon said that now they will get down to business, and asked to take this white sheet. Feng Qin clung to him like a lifeline and began to read carefully every line. At that moment, the phrase of the headmistress of the senior girls' school Chun Nan flew to him that this document was a non-disclosure agreement. Feng Qin looked at the blonde blankly, asking about what he had just heard. The events of the chapter take place in the same office of Lai Song, who is the headmistress of Chun Nan Senior Girls' School. The woman sits down at her workplace, puts her head on her open palm, as if leaning, and says that they have several school rules at school that must be followed. And then Lai Song added that of course there are some things that should never go beyond the Chun Nan Senior Girls' School. After that, Feng Qin again buries his eyes in the white sheet of the document and begins to carefully familiarize himself with the printed text. And that's what it says, Chun Nan Senior Girls' School, Non-Disclosure Agreement. Then there is a significant inscription. Pay attention to the first two rules. This is followed by the first, you cannot use force against girls, and then the second, no relationship within the walls of the Chun Nan Senior Girls' School. Here Lai Song advises Feng Qin to pay special attention to the second rule, since the Chun Nan Senior Girls' School does not recruit boys in order to establish a harem within these walls. The blonde adds that, unfortunately, all the previous guys were transferred only for this. Feng Qin calmly exhaled and said that it was all good, and he completely agreed. But then suddenly the young man got up from the light green armchair on which he had been sitting motionless until that time, and loudly, at the top of his voice, began to ask in what sense not to use force. The young man added that he was a man, and could not allow himself to be beaten by everyone who was not lazy. The blonde, in response to this remark, raised one hand in a conciliatory gesture, and said that if this action was in self-defense, then this is a completely different question. Feng Qin chuckled at this and said that it was fine then. He agreed with that too. Then the young man, reading the words of the non-disclosure agreement document again, asked what he had been interested in for a long time. Namely, why boys suddenly began to be recruited to Chun Nan High School for girls. The headmistress was depressed by the question and visibly saddened. Lai Song explained to Feng Qin that the whole point is that the students of the Chun Nan Senior Girls' School spend whole days, weeks and years surrounded only by girls. That is why they absolutely do not know how to behave in the direction of boys, as well as just communicate with guys. The headmistress went on to say that in connection with this, the students of the Chun Nan Senior Girls' School certainly began to form the opinion that all the guys in the world are just goats. The blonde added that their inability to communicate with the male sex only added fuel to the fire, and of course increased the effect. Feng Qin, who listened attentively to every word of the woman and tried to grasp the whole essence, did not see the lonely tears rolling down her beautiful face. The woman began to talk again, dedicating the guy to this whole complicated matter. The headmistress told that last academic year their senior girls' school Chun Nan accepted a very large number of guys, but all of them were motivated only by the desire to have a relationship with someone, or just to sleep together. She said that this only worsened the already deplorable situation. Then the blonde added that this is why Chun Nan Senior Girls' School is going to accept a limited number of boys this new academic year, but most importantly with good intentions. After that, Lai Song raised her head and looked desperately at Feng Qin. The woman folded her two palms in a pleading gesture and rounded her sad eyes. The headmistress began to pitifully ask Feng Qin to help the young man change the opinion of the students of the Chun Nan Senior Girls' School in relation to the guys. Lee soon added that all her hope is directed solely at him. Then the blonde came right up to the young man and grabbed his shoulders again. Then Lai Song began to cry at the top of her voice and tell Feng Qin that the whole fate of Chun Nan High School for girls was only in the hands of a young man. The woman distorted her face in a martyred grimace and begged the guy to promise her right away that he would definitely try. At the same time, she called the young man by name many times. At that moment, Feng Qin could not stand the sad picture that unfolded and quietly said under his breath that he would certainly try. It was obvious that he was doing all this, that is, agreeing, under pressure, since he had no other way out in order to pay Dad's debt. Lai Song recoiled after that, and her face broke into a satisfied smile. She said that she always knew that she could rely on this young man. The blonde again radiantly looked at Feng Qin with her orange eyes, and suggested that he take his things to the hostel, which is located not far from here. Feng Qin nodded and was about to leave when Lai Song looked at him again, who, as if by the way, firmly asked not to approach the old abandoned building, since it is a forbidden zone. Apparently, the blonde wanted to protect the young man so that he would not look for more troubles on the fifth point. The guy who was standing at the door turned around half a turn, nodded and hurried away. Then, after another short period of time, Feng Qin walks through a dark garden, which consists of mighty broad-leaved and spreading trees, and is also located next to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The young man finally sees the protruding tops of the building, just like a real princess castle in a fairy tale, and says out loud that this mansion is so huge. Feng Qin is standing right in front of the entrance to the men's dormitory, in which the number of students is as many as 0 people. The guy goes inside through huge doors, next to which there were tall columns, and walks through the building, while studying the internal arrangement of the hostel. Here he finally finds his future room, which has an impressive number 201. Feng Qin opens the door and immediately goes inside. The young man greatly admires the room, so that even joyful stars light up in his eyes. The guy says out loud that this is a great luxury. His room turns out to be spacious and bright. Immediately upon entering it, there is a picture hanging on the wall, and right under it there is a table covered with an ochre tablecloth, with a white vase and flowers in it. Also in Feng Qin's new room, there is a coffee table in the middle, covered with a tablecloth of the same color as the previous table, and 2 blue armchairs next to it. There is another painting on the other wall, and there are 2 windows in the room, on which translucent curtains of light green color hang. Further events occur again some time later, when Feng Qin has already managed to sort out his things from the suitcase. The young man was very tired, because unpacking is actually a very energy-consuming business. The guy sits down on the floor near the window and exhales, because it was all too tiring. The young man turns his head and looks at the street when he decides to go for a walk. Feng Qin walks again through a garden of spreading trees and sees a stone gazebo in front of him. The guy admires the beauty surrounding him from all sides and says out loud that he can't even imagine how much it all costs. After that, Feng Qin goes further and, walking, sees a large clean pond with clear water. The guy stands on the shore and says that they even made an artificial lake, which actually looks like it was made by nature itself. But at this moment, the young man lowers his gaze down and dumbfoundedly rounds his eyes in shock. Feng Qin sees a female school uniform on the ground covered with fresh grass. Moreover, there is a bronze sword on top of her, which looks too much like a katana. And exactly at this moment, the female crown abruptly appears out of the water. The girl, who is wearing few clothes, namely underwear similar to a swimsuit, emerges from the clear water, thereby giving splashes and waves on the water, previously calm as a smooth surface. A girl with long brown hair is standing tall. Water is still running down her profusely, and she meets Feng Qin's gaze. She blushes deeply and starts shouting at the top of her voice with all her strength. The same thing is done by a young man, scared maybe even more than a girl. Both the guy and the girl are standing in a stupor, not knowing what to do next. The girl is still screaming and abruptly sits down in the water while hugging herself with her arms, trying to somehow cover her body. She squints her eyes hard and thinks about what a guy can do here. The chapter begins in the same place where the last one ended. That is, by an artificial lake in the garden of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. Feng Qin raises both hands up, as they usually do when they surrender to the police, and begins to justify himself. The young man apologizes and says that he was just passing by and especially did not see anything. Feng Qin switches to heavy artillery and starts telling the girl to look into his innocent eyes, which, according to him, cannot lie. After that, the guy is going to quickly disappear and once again apologizes for such an inconvenient and inappropriate concern, while adding that she should continue to have fun. But it was not there. The girl abruptly rises to her feet and walks out of the water with a quick step. The first thing she does is grab a katana in her hand and immediately runs after Feng Qin, who is already running away from that place. The girl screams that she will kill him while calling him a bastard, to which the young man asks if she can get dressed first. They are running fast. One is trying to get away. The other is trying to catch up because of all the forces. At this moment, Feng Qingyu comes up with an idea that is brilliant in his own opinion, so he stops abruptly and shouts that there is a UFO in the sky, while pointing with his index finger. The girl believes, also stops and turns around, asking where. After that, without hearing an answer from the young man, he turns his head to the same place and does not see Feng Qin. There was no trace of the young man. She understands that her boyfriend was brazenly deceived and disappeared as an opponent in an internet game. The girl is still angry and very upset. The girl understands that the young man saw her in a swimsuit, and this whole terrible situation is very shameful. The brown-haired woman again in a fit of anger promises to kill the arrogant guy and plops into the water, hugging herself with her arms. Feng Qin managed to run far away from the artificial lake and finally stopped in order to catch his breath properly for the second time in a day. The young man says out loud that he seems to have broken away from this infection. This is the word he called the girl. He thinks that he just went for a walk, and here it is. After that, Feng Qin's thoughts float away in a completely different direction, and the guy remembers the view he saw of that girl. The young man thinks that maybe he would not say that he is too upset by what is happening and what he has just seen. Feng Qin blushed again and ordered his head not to fantasize anymore, while lightly hitting himself on the top of the head. Feng Qin then walks out of the gate of Chunnan Senior Girls' School, smiling a little at the same time, as he remembered that it was time to meet Xuan Xin and Hong Kai Yang. The guy goes straight to the Longjiang Cafe, which has a sign saying that this place has the best dinners for a large company. Feng Qin enters the cafe and goes to a large table for 6 people, which was occupied by 2 of his friends. Xuan Xin, seeing the young man, immediately rises and hugs him by the shoulders, while saying that their hero has finally appeared. The blonde smiles slyly and says that it definitely needs to be noted, since no one thought that the guy would return alive and unharmed. Both guys sit down at a table, and opposite Hong Kai Yang, who is sitting, picks up a mobile phone and quickly takes pictures of the young men on the rear camera, while counting to 3 and saying smile broadly. Feng Qin does not have time to do anything and figure it out, and Xuan Xin stretches out one hand, which shows 2 fingers, and closes one eye. After that, Hong Kai Yang hands the phone to Xuan Xin, and he begins to look at the photo, enlarging every detail. The blonde begins to say out loud that Feng Qin turned out very well, but he himself is certainly better. The young man continued that he could also add all sorts of different filters in order to hide the sour face of that. And then Xuan Xin's face blossoms into a radiant smile at all, and he asks Feng Qin how he got the photo. He is very annoyed. It can be seen by the dissatisfied eyes that look attentively at each other. The brown-haired man grabs the blonde by the shoulders and resolutely says that he will kill him, of course, as a joke. At the same time, he called him not a very good word. After that, Feng Qin pushes the blonde away from him and shouts that he has already got him with his nasty jokes. And then the young man promises that if he dies, he will definitely take him with him. He will not leave without him. Xuan Xin flies off a little and tries to cover his ears from such a loud cry of a friend. Then a short period of time passes, during which the guys have time to talk heart to heart. The blonde man inhales sadly and says that, judging by Feng Qin's story, he has 2 news for that, while showing 2 fingers. He keeps saying that one of them is good, but the other is bad. After that, the blonde asks Feng Qin which one to start with. The brown-haired man clicks his tongue and asks the blonde to start the story with good news, while wondering why he is all happy. Xuan Xin immediately agrees and gives a thumbs up. He starts talking about how Feng Qin was very lucky with the class. To this, the brown-haired man asks why. The blonde with hearts in his eyes enthusiastically begins to say that Feng Qin was lucky since he got into class number 1, and only some stunning beauties study in it. In response to this remark, the brown-haired man says nothing, but only asks about the bad news. Xuan Xin sharply shouts out that those pretty girls are actually like roses with huge and sharp thorns. Feng Qin loudly asks the blonde to express himself more clearly, since he understands little from the words of a friend. After that, Xuan Xin begins his long story, and his 2 friends, including Hong Kai Yang, who had been a little quiet before, carefully listened to him. He says that last year 300 brave guys transferred to Chunnan Senior Girls' School, and a third of them got into this class at number 1. But it turned out that none of them ever returned, and when the other boys found out about it, they of course tried to escape, but unfortunately, they were overtaken by the same fate. After that, Xuan Xin says that among the class at number 1, several girls stand out, namely 4. He says they were nicknamed the 4 witches. Then the image of really 4 girls pops up. The first is happy, smiling, with pink hair and blue eyes. The second is a little gloomy and with a purple square. The third girl is red-haired and cheerful. And as for the fourth, she is confident, with short blue hair and bright green eyes. Feng Qin thinks about the names of the girls, scratches his chin with his hand, looking somewhere at the floor, and decides that he needs to be extremely careful with these 4. Xuan Xin's mouth opens again and says that his master has not finished yet. The blonde advises Feng Qin to be on the alert with the rest of the girls, too, since they have more than 100 different and most importantly effective ways to get rid of guys. The blonde is not allowed to finish the sentence normally, and his entire remark as a whole, the angry voice of Feng Qin, who loudly asks if they are talking about school. The young man is angry at what he has heard, because he is afraid, and therefore asks out loud that these girls do not have homework or lessons. Then why do they spend all their time destroying the male sex? Right after that, the thought came to Feng Qin's bright head that if you really think about it, then he can't just sit idly by. Otherwise he's definitely screwed. The young man imagines a crowd of these embittered girls, purses his lips, and tears almost appear in his eyes. The guy understands that it is vital for him to come up with a good plan. The events of the chapter begin with a loud and shrill ringing of the alarm clock of the mobile phone, which was set at 6 o'clock in the morning. Feng Qin reaches for the screen with a finger of one hand and turns off the annoying and rather nasty sound. Then he abruptly sits down on the bed and then jumps off it, while loudly saying that it's time to get up. Feng Qin rubs his face with his hand and says out loud that it's time to start. The guy looks quite determined and confident. Apparently he still managed to come up with a worthwhile plan. At this moment, a parent's voice is heard from another room, which says to get up if the young man does not want to be late for his first day at his new school. Feng Qin takes a martyred breath and raises his head to the ceiling. The guy is annoyed that he was interrupted by such a truly epic moment. But still the young man hurries to answer, then he knows everything and gets up. After that, Feng Qin decides to do take two and asks himself, let's get started. At the same time, the guy's face broke into a terribly happy smile on the floor of his face. After about 10 minutes, Feng Qin is no longer standing in that place, but a decorated man with a wig of golden hair on his head. The young man speaks out loud about how handsome he is. There is no smeared foundation on his cheek, his eyelids are tinted with strange shadows, and his lips are crookedly lined with pink lip gloss. The guy is wearing a bugo-ha suit, which consists of a black shirt and pants along with a light brown coat. Feng Qin thinks to himself that no girl would want to get involved with such a guy. He is sure that his brilliant plan is simply a win-win. After a while, the young man walks towards his new school, Chunnan, while every minute adjusting the blonde hair of the wig, which is always climbing into his eyes. And now Feng Qin already sees a pole with a sign that indicates the direction. When the guy comes to the gate, he sees luxury cars standing and parked at the entrance to the school. At this moment, Feng Qin realizes that the students of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School are very rich, since they come here in such expensive cars. After that, he jokingly thinks to himself that it's strange that they don't fly here on their own helicopters yet. And exactly then the huge blades of the air transport of movement begin to make noise over the young man, from which the leaves of the trees begin to fly in different directions. Feng Qin opens his mouth in surprise and asks out loud that someone really arrives at school by helicopter. Then the guy begins to feel like a real homeless man and a poor man. Feng Qin tries not to think too much and just hurry to class. When he starts walking along the sidewalk, that's when he sees a girl standing a few meters away with her hair in a ponytail. She is standing with a katana in her hand, and the young man recognizes that infection from an artificial lake in her. The girl also turns out to be from the disciplinary committee as an evil. Feng Qin gets very angry and begins to think that this is definitely some kind of evil joke of fate. The young man understands that if the girl from the lake recognizes him, then he will definitely not live, and he is 100% dead, whom she herself will personally send to the next world. He takes to thinking about what he should do, because she is standing right by the fence, and there is no way for a guy to get through her. Feng Qin sighs and decides to go around the other side, since, in his opinion, there should be another way that leads to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The young man stops in front of the pink stone wall of the fence enclosing the territory, and frowns at him, studying and pondering. He assumes that, in principle, he can climb over this wall. The guy just hopes that no one will notice him. Feng Qin accelerates, pushes off with all his might, jumps over the pink obstacle and lands on the fresh grass on the other side. The young man sighs happily and decides first of all to find a class teacher. A few minutes later, the guy is already standing in front of a wooden door and knocks on it. Feng Qin asks for a petition when he enters, and then moves towards a young woman sitting in front of a computer with a small tuft of brown hair on her head, whose name is Miss Tian. The guy introduces himself and says that he is new in her class. The woman is of course surprised by the appearance of the young man, which was expected. Miss Tian hastens to say that Miss Lai Song has already warned her about Feng Qin's transfer. She immediately gets up from her workplace and heads out of the office, while saying that she will take the young man to his new class, calling him to follow her. When Feng Qin walks leisurely down the school corridor, all the students standing there look askance at the guy. These students whisper about Feng Qin's persona, saying that the newcomer looks so strange. The young man silently follows the class teacher and approaches the door, next to which there is a sign with the inscription, Class Number 1. They enter together, and Miss Tian hurries to ask the class for attention. Miss Tian introduces the new student in front of the whole class at number 1 and says that she hopes that the students will certainly make friends with him. After this remark of the class teacher, a dead silence reigns in the office, and then Feng Qin decides to put his plan into action. The young man, who is still standing at the blackboard for everyone to see, sharply slaps his hands on the teacher's desk and looks at all the students with a mad look. At the same time, he smiles rapaciously, and so far nothing seems to betray his acting. Feng Qin gives his name and first of all says that his favorite hobby is a good fight. Half of the girls are tearing their mouths open in surprise, saying at the same time that it's cool, half are just smiling. But only 4 of those same witches are sitting and looking very strangely. Feng Qin does not pay any proper attention to this and continues his acting monologue. He loudly declares that he hates it when someone comes closer to him than half a meter. Feng Qin adds that the last person who violated this rule is still collecting money for his own treatment. The young man again glared at the students and asked if he was expressing himself clearly enough, while one hand was still lying on the teacher's desk, and he put the other in the pocket of his black pants. In class number 1, the admiring exclamations of the students were heard, who said out loud that the new guy was a real man, and also that the guy was so cool. The young man was confused, as he clearly expected not such a reaction, especially such a violent one. He asks out loud if they are serious, since they should have just been scared. Then Feng Qin wonders what is wrong with these students of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The events of the chapter begin in the class number 1 of Chunnan Senior Girls' School. The class teacher was a little embarrassed by the remark of the new student, thinking that he really is a bully. Miss Tian invites Feng Qin to sit at an empty table next to Han Yu Ding. Feng Qin thinks to himself that the name of this student definitely seems so familiar to him, but he can't remember yet. The young man agrees with the class teacher, nods positively, and heads through the girls' desks. As he walks, there is a deathly silence in the office. Then he sits down at his new study place. Feng Qin feels very uncomfortable, as if out of place. He thinks about what he should do. Just then he remembers that the first thing he has to do is find these 4 witches. The third girl with red hair is Moya Zhao, who leaned her head on her folded fingers. The first pink-haired girl is Wai Wei Tong. She wraps her curls on her finger. The last girl with a short haircut of blue hair is the martial Tongfei Lu, who folded her arms on her chest and leaned back in her chair. And the second of the 4 witches is Xiaoxu Nangong. She looks very sadly at the screen of the camera or phone. Feng Tian carefully examined them and still came to the conclusion that these girls are really real beauties, but it is necessary to be extremely careful with them. After that, the young man turned his head to the side and noticed a girl with a pink square. He greeted her quietly and said that she seemed very familiar to him. Feng Qin directly asked if they had met her anywhere before. At the same time, the guy smiled broadly, which scared the poor girl. She jumped up and then began to cover her head with her hands, immediately saying that he definitely confused her with someone. The young man did not look away, but also stared at her intently. Further events unfold in the student council office. A girl with light green hair whispered in the other's ear, but somehow too loudly, since everyone heard what he heard, that a new boy had been transferred to their school. A girl with long golden hair, who was sitting at the head of the office, hurried to say that it was true, and her mother translated this boy. She turned out to be the president of the student council, named Lin Yisong, who was also the daughter of the headmistress of the senior girls' school Chunan Lai Song. At the same time, the girl was holding a glass with a red drink in one hand. Standing next to her was the girl who had been swimming in an artificial lake yesterday. This girl scratched her chin and wondered why the headmistress herself personally transferred this guy, who he is in general, and what he is. She took the documents of the young man lying on the table and began to read his personal file. Her eyes suddenly widened, her mouth rounded, and her eyebrows crept up when she recognized the guy. The girl screamed out loud that it really was him. Those standing nearby immediately began to ask her if she knew this guy. She was beside herself with anger and rage at the young man for yesterday's incident. But the girl answered her friends, lying that she did not know him, and the face of the new guy just seemed a little familiar to her. At the end, she even shouted that she had never met a single guy in her entire life. After that, the president of the student council put her hands in a lock, putting them on the table, and said that since now there was a new boy in their school again, they should definitely get rid of him. The blonde said these words so calmly, only nodding a little and smiling rapaciously. A girl with light green hair expressed her opinion that suddenly this kid would turn out to be normal, and the girl standing next to her with 2 pigtails agreed with this, adding that Lai Song personally transferred the young man to everything else, so they should better not do it openly. The daughter of the headmistress pondered these statements, weakly agreeing with someone else's opinion. The president of the student council got up from her seat and raised her index finger to the sky, inviting the girls to start by just watching the young man. Lin Yasun informed the others that the guy got into class number 1, which means that the 4 witches will take care of him themselves. The other 3 girls looked at the blonde admiringly, opening their mouths with joy and pressing their hands to their chests. They shouted with one voice that their president was a real genius. Lin Yasong nodded gratefully, agreeing with the words of her friends, and said that they could already go. The blonde asked the girl with pigtails who came closer about what she wanted to say more. She stopped nearby and cunningly began to say that all the students already know perfectly well that she is actually allergic to alcoholic beverages. The girl concluded by adding, while giggling, that the blonde does not need to pretend that she has wine in her glass, and not just grape juice. Lin Yasong got angry at this remark and shouted that she just liked to drink grape juice from a glass. The events of the new chapter begin in the class number 1 of Chunnan Senior Girls' School. Miss Tian, that is, the class teacher, who stands at the blackboard at her usual workplace, tells the students that the first thing she needs is some student to help her bring textbooks to the whole class. Miss Tian immediately turns to Feng Qin with a request that he help her, as he is the only male representative in this school. The young man is straining with his whole body and, of course, is announced, since he definitely cannot refuse. The guy thinks to himself that the homeroom teacher has already given him the first assignment. After that, Miss Tian also asks for help from a girl with golden hair, which was pulled into 2 ponytails on the sides, tied with pink bows. The person whom the teacher calls by the name of Fang Kekken hurries to immediately answer that she is not feeling well today. At the same time, she pretends to yawn, and a tear even splashed out of one eye. Right next to her, at her side, sits the pink-haired Han Yuding. Fang Kekken pokes that one with his foot and looks menacingly, about to lie down on the pillow that lies on the desk. Han Yuding, under pressure from a peer, tells the class teacher that she will go instead of that girl. There was fear in the pink-haired woman's eyes, and then the girl bent her head, looking at the floor. Feng Qin noticed everything that had just happened. He realized that these classmates were laughing at Han Yuding, considering her a scapegoat. The young man frowned at everyone, clearly not being satisfied with the unfolding situation of the girls. After that, when Feng Qin and Han Yuding stood and walked around the office, the young man repeated his attempt to talk to the girl with pink hair. He asked her again if she remembered him, saying that they had recently met with her about a couple of days ago. The guy tried to look friendly, so he smiled sweetly and gesticulated with his hands. Feng Qin, pointing his finger at himself, even said for authenticity that he helped the pink-haired girl to return her bag that day. Han Yuding turned to the young man and nodded. Of course, she remembered the guy who handed her the bag stolen earlier with apologies and words that he thinks that the thing belongs to her. Han Yuding added that she remembers everything and thanked the young man again. She asked the guy to talk later, to which Feng Qin nodded and of course agreed, thinking that there must be some reasons for this that he did not yet know. After that, Feng Qin thought that it would really be strange if a newly transferred guy to a school that hates male people started communicating with one of his classmates. The guy sighs heavily, almost martyred, and thinks that it's still difficult and hard to communicate with girls. Feng Qin picks up his mobile phone and decides to sit in it, because somehow it's very boring at Chunnan High School for girls, and there's nothing to do. After the young man unlocked the phone, the first thing that pops up on his screen is a window with news from the Cuisian source that a statue of the god Buddha, which is 1,000 years old and made entirely of gold, has been found. It also says that when it was opened outside, an unknown spirit got out to no one yet. Here Feng Qin frowned and thought that this was some very strange news. The guy was standing in the corridor at the windows that overlooked the garden adjacent to the Chunnan Senior Girls' School when the pink-haired Han Yuding abruptly approached him. The girl stopped in front of the young man and called him by name. Feng Qin scratched his head, a little embarrassed by such an environment without third parties. Han Yuding looked first to the right, then to the left, checking if there was at least one diva soul nearby. Apparently, the pink-haired girl was afraid that someone might hear their upcoming conversation, and even the walls have ears. She suddenly bowed to Feng Qin at 90 degrees, asking for forgiveness, and bitter tears gushed from the girl's eyes. Feng Qin did not expect such a turn of events in any way, and did not think of anything smarter than just asking what the pink-haired girl was apologizing for. She straightened up in her back, stood straight in front of the guy again and explained that she apologized for not wanting to talk to him before. She wanted to continue to justify herself, but the young man interrupted her with a smile on his face. Feng Qin said that he understood everything perfectly, and was not offended at all. On the contrary, he asked the pink-haired girl not to worry about it. The young man suggested that she pretend in front of everything that they don't really know each other, but in fact, they will be friends. The guy added that all this, if the girl of course does not mind. Han Yu-ding smiled strongly and widely, waving her head to the sides and her hands, said that of course she was not against such an outcome of events. Further events moved to a group of girls under the catchy name Four Witches. They are all sitting together in the hallway and discussing the new guy. Moya Zhao, with red hair and a smile on her face, is the first to start a dialogue when she suggests out loud that Feng Qin is afraid of the four of them. Tong Fei Lu, with short blue hair and green eyes, waves with one hand and puts forward his hypothesis that it is possible that this is because the young man is only the first day at Chunnan Senior Girls' School. She then asks Xiaoxu Nangong what she thinks about this situation. A girl with a square of purple hair and the same color eyes takes out some kind of tarot-like card and looks at it thoughtfully. The events of the next chapter begin in the corridor of the Chunnan Senior Girls' School, where the four witches are located. Tong Fei Lu with short blue hair and green eyes asks Xiaoxu Nangong with a purple square about what she thinks about the new boyfriend Feng Qing. The girl pulls out some kind of fortune-telling card, like a tarot, from the spread out on the table and frowns at her. Then horror freezes on her face and in her eyes, and the girl is speechless for a couple of seconds. She does not explain in any way what has just been taken away and asks the other girls sitting next to her to listen to her and leave this guy alone. Xiaoxu Nangong on the exhale speaks directly about the fact that they let him finish this year in peace. After that, the girl with the purple square gets up from her seat and walks away. And the other three girls, Moya Zhao, Wai Wei Tong and Tong Fei Lu, all together frowningly look in the same direction, where their fourth friend was just sitting. They still didn't understand a word of Xiaoxu Nangong's strange remark. Tong Fei Lu is interested in asking her friends about what happened to Xiaoxu Nangong. The girl with blue hair also adds that she has never seen her like this in her life. Wai Wei Tong also expresses his opinion about the situation unfolding in front of them, which is that it looks like the girl with the purple square guessed something unusual. The girl with pink hair asks the girls about their joint further actions, as they face a choice. The first option is to listen to Xiaoxu Nangong and leave this guy alone, and the second is to continue to adhere to the well-known plan to expel male people from Chunnan High School for Girls. The girl with red hair, namely Moya Zhao, firmly says that there is nothing to choose the first option for. She explains this by saying that otherwise it would mean that all their hard work for several years was in vain, and just in vain. Then Tong Fei Lu rises from his chair and slaps both palms on the table. The girl with blue hair and green eyes resolutely declares that then the three of them will continue their work in accordance with the second plan studied for a long time. Tong Fei Lu, frowning, in the end only advises to try to be more careful. At these words, the two remaining girls raise one palm each up and shout loudly that they completely agree. Tong Fei Lu sits back down at his desk and folds his hands behind his head, leaning back in his chair again. She says out loud that she personally still wonders what Xiaoxu Nangong especially saw in this seemingly ordinary guy. Further events occur when Feng Qin is already returning with the students for the whole class and sits back down in his new and so far unusual place. Moya Zhao immediately approaches him with two red tails on his head and winks. She hands the guy a drink, while laughing sweetly and straightening her hair by the ear. The girl suddenly thanks the young man for helping their homeroom teacher with a mountain of textbooks. Feng Qin, on the other hand, sits and looks at her absolutely calmly, saying that it's not worth it, and he didn't do anything special and supernatural. But the guy was very scared about himself and does not understand what she suddenly needed from him. And when Moya Zhao hands him a drink with the words that the young man probably wants to drink, so let him take it and not be shy, he generally gets lost inside himself, not understanding what is happening now. Feng Qin gives the girl a grateful smile, takes the drink and puts it on the desk. The guy says thank you and that he will definitely drink it later. Feng Qin thinks to himself that these four witches underestimate him too much, since they think that he is really so stupid. Then he puts the donated bottle of drink in the drawer of his desk. This gesture does not escape the attention of the red-haired Moya Zhao. She turns around once more at the guy, waves goodbye to him with her palm and sweetly says that they will see each other later. Around the same time, Fan Kekken, the blonde with ponytails who considers Han Yu-ding her scapegoat an errand girl, yawns for the whole class and calls a pink-haired girl. She sprawled impressively on a chair and in general at the whole desk when she says she doesn't feel well. Therefore, the blonde asks Han Yu-ding to wash the windows for her, to which she agrees without hesitation, since she has no way to refuse. Her green eyes instantly got wet and sadder than before. And after the long-awaited bell rings for the whole school from lessons, which means that everyone can go home, of course, not counting the daily attendance, Fan Kekin quickly rises from his chair. Fan Kekin picks up his school bag, yawns again and says that lessons are finally over. Looking at the blonde with ponytails, Feng Qin frowns and notices to himself that she feels great. In fact, a new chapter begins in class number 1 of Chunnan Girls High School. Han Yuding, with a very sad and upset face, stands at the windows and gently wipes them with a brown cloth. The girl with pink hair thanks Feng Qin, who is standing a meter away from her with the same rag, only larger, and is doing the same thing. The young man smiles at the girl with short pink hair and tells her to just let him know if she suddenly needs someone's help again. Han Yuding abruptly bends down and covers his eyes with the palm of his hand, apparently trying not to cry. After that, Feng Qin, who is in his dorm room, decides to go take a shower or a bath, as he is very tired and sweating. He takes off his brown jacket first, and then unbuttons his black shirt. Just at this moment, the same girl who swam in an artificial lake yesterday runs into this room. She shouts loudly, perhaps to the whole school, that she has finally found a guy, while calling him a not very nice word. The girl brakes sharply at the entrance when she sees Feng Qin in his underpants. She starts screaming harder than ever when she realizes that she caught the guy at the moment when he was changing clothes. After that, she abruptly closes her eyes with her palms, as usually happens when watching a scary movie. The girl loudly asks why each of their meetings necessarily ends in this way. Not the best, by the way. Feng Qin is also scared when he realizes that he is not alone in the room, but gathers himself together and runs up to the brown-haired woman standing at the entrance. Feng Qin loudly and insistently tells the brown-haired girl to finally stop screaming. He covers her mouth with his palm, but presses on her with such force that both of them, unable to stand on their feet, fall to the cold wooden floor. The girl with brown hair, which is tied in a ponytail and tied with a bright red bow, is now lying right under Feng Qin's body. He is still wearing only his underpants and no clothes, but still holds his open palm on her lips. The guy's second hand is located right at the brown-haired woman's head, and the young man's face itself is a couple of centimeters from hers. The girl with the ponytail dumbfounded opened her brown eyes and stared at the young man with them. Her cheeks were deeply flushed from this situation, and it is so clear that she was embarrassed. Feng Qin, on the other hand, seems completely calm, and in a slightly raised tone asks the brown-haired woman to behave more quietly and calmly, especially not to yell at all. Feng Qin's eyes are gray in color and they are quite calm. The eyebrows are furrowed, which betrays the dissatisfaction of their owner. The guy's lips are seriously closed. All this is noticed with her shining eyes by the girl who is still lying under the young man in his underpants. After that, Feng Qin squeezes the brown-haired woman's cheeks with one hand, which still betray embarrassment, since they are pink. The guy speaks into the girl's very face so that she at least once thinks with her brain and thinks about what would happen if one of the students or teachers saw them together in this form. Then the young man menacingly asks the brown-haired woman to close her mouth and finally be silent. The girl turned out to be not a blunder at all, and therefore she sharply screamed with all her might, which gives Feng Qin only 3 seconds to hurry to remove his hands from her. At the same time, the brown-haired woman again called the young man a not very cultured word. And then, either Feng Qin did not have time to remove his hands from the brown-haired woman, or she herself did not wait even 3 seconds. But the result is that the girl with the red bow sharply and brutally kicked the young man in the most painful place for all men. At the same time, she shouted again so that he would finally get away from her. Feng Qin jumped back, as if scalded by boiling water, and shrank with his whole body. There was a deathly silence in the young man's room, the only one occupied in the entire men's dormitory. The guy's face turned like stone for a couple of seconds, and the brown-haired woman was still lying on the wooden floor, only raised on her elbows. Her leg was also in the place where she hit the guy with all her strength. And only after almost a whole minute, when all the neurons finally brought the events that had just happened and the hellish pain to the guy's brain, only then Feng Qin grabbed the place with both hands and fell on one side, squeezing both his legs. The young man screamed, or rather howled loudly and long. Then the sounds that the guy was making changed to a quiet whine like a puppy. It felt like the soul had been taken out of Feng Qin. That's how strong his physical pain was, from which he curled up. Feng Qin began to crawl with all his remaining strength to the other end of his temporary men's dorm room away from this evil brown-haired woman. All this time there was a golden wig on his head. At that moment, a girl with a red bow on her dark hair got to her feet and began shouting at the young man, calling him all sorts of different offensive words again. She was very angry and unhappy, but the blush of embarrassment on her face was still present. A world that stands in ruins, destroyed buildings, ice floes that pierced cars, and a man walking towards the big ice throne. The world was destroyed by his daughter, and after meeting with the Ice Queen, who was sitting on her ice throne, the man asked Sora why the girl did it. Looking with her icy eyes, and the weakling Lee Sajun, the girl asked why now he decided to play father. The father looked sadly at his daughter, who was sitting on her throne, and asked her father if he had come to destroy her, justifying the title of hunter. The father wondered to himself if Sora really wanted this. Others were standing behind him and asked the young man to accept that this was no longer his daughter, now she was a monster. In front of the young man was a comet that informed him of his opinion. Our hero knew that his daughter was in front of him, and not a monster. He answered the others. The man, informing the young man that he would not force him to participate in the fight, and asked him to return. The rest of the warriors standing behind the old calm sun were ready to attack in full uniform. Our hero, standing with his back to his daughter and drawing his weapon, looked at the old man. The same did not understand what the man's behavior meant. Then the father explained that he was not here to kill Sora. He came to protect her. The Dreamcom informed the young man that the girl would die anyway, but then his father asked him to send him to his forefathers, and smiling looked death in the eyes. He knew that he had failed as a parent and was absolutely useless for both Sora and Calm Sun. At these reflections, he and the old man, looking at each other, clashed in a fight. The father could not idly look at the murder of his own daughter, with all the current situation and despite what kind of parent he had become. And lying on the cold ground after the attack, our hero fell in battle. The daughter saw how her father was pulling his hand towards her, and his eyes were slowly closing. She was beside herself with anger. She used all her might, gathered all her strength. The last quest on Earth has been started. The hunters were looking at the final boss. They had to kill the witch Lee Sora. The father, with tears in his eyes and with the last of his strength, looked at his daughter, apologizing to her for everything. Then the earth under him collapsed from the power of Sora. Falling into the unknown, our hero thought only that if only he could start all over again. The unique quest of Hunter Lee Sajun was started at this moment. A unique quest changed the future. Regression has begun. Here you could see the hero's life, student life, acquaintance with a girl, love, and the birth of a child, where the mother was not happy, and then quarrels and scandals in the family, after which the mother and daughter left. Father, then the girl's mother dies, and the girl is taken away by the services. After that, a terrible life forces the girl to become exactly that witch. Regression is complete. Our hero woke up on the bed as a young boy. The sun was shining outside. Standing up, the young man at first did not understand where he was, because he clearly remembered how he died yesterday on the top of the mountain. Seeing the phone behind him, the hero looked at the time and found that he had returned to the past, 2025. Looking at himself in the mirror, he thought that it was impossible. He was only young himself in front of him, and how he managed to return to the past was also a mystery to the young man. Sitting on the bed, he thought about what was happening. Then the doorbell rang, and someone was questioning Lee Sajun inside. It was Yu Yong. The young man ran to the door and opened it. In front of him was a girl, and next to her daughter. Mom asked. Soru wanted to say hello to his father. The young man looked at the child in horror, and the girl smiled happily. The girl stood in the doorway and tried to appease the hero, telling him that she understood his feelings, that she unexpectedly showed up on his doorstep, and that his child was in front of him. Holding his head, he repeated the word unexpectedly, because the girl came after so many years to introduce him to his daughter. And he asked if the girl took this baby to threaten him. The girl wanted to object something, but then the young man asked if the girl had proof. The girl was looking at the cursing parents at that moment. The father in front of the child asked if the girl had gone out somewhere else, and that without proof of paternity, the girl would not return. The girl, upset, stood and looked at the man who could be her father. The young man recalled that in his previous life he had chased his mother away with his daughter and considered himself the most terrible person. But now before him was the quest of Sora's 5 misfortunes. The young man looked at his daughter, and she looked at him in surprise, thinking that this child was destined to destroy the world. And now she looked so cute and innocent. There were so many misfortunes that happened to Sora, but Sajun didn't know a single one that had overtaken her. Now that the young man thought about it, they haven't had any good memories at all since they met. Not only did he not recognize the girl as his own child, but he also let down Yoonhee, who loved the girl until her death. After that, the care of Sora fell on the shoulders of the young man. But he was overwhelmed with guilt and regrets. When the girl left them, the young man worked, raking up piles of debts. Sora was abandoned to her fate. The reason why Sora became a witch was because of the hero himself, as he believed. a child who had no right to call him daddy. Clenching his fist, the young man thought about it, and the girl, seeing the reaction, began to calm him down and talk about the child, but the young man said he believed her. This reaction surprised the girl, and our hero, squatting down, looked at his daughter and told her affectionately that she was his daughter. The girl looked at her father with fascination. Standing in the doorway, the young man invited them to come inside, because they probably got tired on the way, and held out his hand to his daughter so that she could grab it. Addressing the girl as a princess, she held out her hand to him, smiling, and they all went inside together, smiling at each other. Sitting at the table, the girl thought about how the young man had changed. The man who was a slob in life suddenly cleaned out the whole house as soon as they entered it, and now he was calmly playing with Sora, even though it was their first meeting. Yoonhee told Sejun that yesterday he was still a green youth, and now he has changed. The young man, treating his guests and sitting down at the table, said that everything in the world is changing. Sejun decided to find out from the girl why she had been silent until today. Yoonhee said that they parted on a bad note, and the girl found out about the pregnancy when the young man was called. Yoonhee thought that she would raise the girl alone, but she herself could not cope with the problems that piled up. Then the hero decided to ask what happened to the girl. Yoonhee had an accident, her house burned down, and now she didn't know who to stay with. She did not ask to take responsibility, because she gave birth to a girl of her own volition. Then what did they want to do? The hero asked. The girl asked to be allowed to stay with the young man for a while, because mom could not let the child sleep in a motel. The young man immediately agreed, even though the girl started talking about the pantry. Sejun explained that his house was not too big, but if you remove unnecessary junk, then there will be a place for a mother and daughter. And getting up, the young man asked where the things were. The girl was shocked by the whole situation and the way our hero behaved, because Lee Sejun would not have agreed to such a thing so easily, because he was a problematic and immature guy. But now looking at him, she saw how the young man carefully communicated with his daughter and brought their things to the apartment. The girl admitted to herself honestly in her head, because when she came to the young man, she was ready to listen to a whole lot of flattering words in her address. The young man interrupted her reasoning, saying that his proposal might seem a little chaotic to her, but after asking about them, the young man offered to get married, which plunged the girl into a big shock. She couldn't understand what had happened until they saw each other. Her drink was pouring right past her mouth at that moment. She was in the sediment. Yoonhee tried to replay the whole day in her head, starting from the moment when the hero believed that Sora was his daughter after the first meeting, and without any hesitation let them live in his house, and now also an offer. The hero understood that if he didn't say it now, he would be very sorry. He had to take responsibility for what he had done. His heart was ready to fix everything right now. After all, the time and emptiness that came after the death of Yang showed him what an important person the girl was. They were sitting at the table opposite each other, and in an icy voice she called Sejun, saying that she came to him because her affairs were really bad, and not because she had any feelings left. The young man realized that they did not part on a good note, so it would be strange if she loved him still. An unexpected marriage. The girl did not know what to say. She thanked Sejun for allowing them to live at his place, but offered to wait with the marriage. The young man agreed. Our hero knew that this would be the girl's answer. It's not too late to win the trust of Yoonhee with small steps, Sejun thought after all the conversation they had and based on the past experience that the hero had. They were sitting at the table and discussing their lives, and the girl was lying next to her and looking at her parents. While Yoonhee was dressing the girl, the young man asked, after all, taking care of spending money on her, and even earning money to maintain the house is a colossal work. Did she have any plan? The hero thought to himself that the girl would rely on him, but she replied that she had something in mind, and Yoonhee replied that she wanted to join the guild. Washing dishes and listening to the girl and words about the guild, he stopped and thought that this was one of the causes of Sora's misfortunes. The girl reported that she would become a hunter, and that's why she asked to take care of Sora. But after looking at his mother and happy daughter, the young man realized that this had not happened in his past life. 25 years ago, 10 years before the real events. In an instant, the world collapsed for everyone. A hole appeared in the wall through which icy energy passed, and meanwhile people were quietly walking with their children and living their usual lives. But everything changed. It was a previously unprecedented natural disaster. From this very hole in the wall, all kinds of evil spirits came out through the spatial cracks and led to the destruction of humanity. The world was plunged into chaos. However, people survived despite everything that was happening in the world, because there were those who were able to use the mana flowing from the otherworldly space, turning it into power. People capable of defeating the invincible. Something began to be called hunters. Yoonhee was heading to the building the next day to find out her options about a new job. The contract that was in her hands she received from the guild. Our hero asked the girl if she had signed it. Had not yet made a decision at that time, and therefore the contract was not signed. But the advantages and benefits beckoned the girl, so she thought about signing it. The guys were sitting at home and discussing the situation while their daughter was sleeping. After the story about the contract, asked our hero if he was worried about something in this contract. The young man, exhaling, spoke about the pitfalls that hunters' contracts breathe. Many guilds are lured into a trap in this way, so they enrich themselves, and our hero believed that it was better not to take risks. Yoonhee was surprised by Sojin's words and thought that if she did not sign the contract, she would not be able to pay off the debt and become the mistress of her life. Sojin suggested that Yoonhee sign the contract as she wanted. If the girl did not see any problems for herself, then it was necessary to act. But if she felt something was wrong, then Sojin himself would grow a hunter out of her. On the way to the guild building, Yoonhee recalled the conversation with Sojin and thought about how the guy had changed. When they parted in the past, it was difficult to distinguish a young man from a child. In the evening, laying down his daughter, who asked Sojin if her parents would sleep, our hero answered his daughter that they had a lot to discuss and they would go to bed right after her. The girl watched the conversation between her daughter and the young man, who wished pleasant dreams, smiling with a sincere smile, and after this picture she thought that he was probably really a dad. The next day, Sojin brought Sora to eat ice cream, and looking at all kinds of flavors, the girl could not choose one in any way. When asked by her father if she chose the taste, she still decided that she wanted chocolate, and the hero asked for an alien mom and an average cup at the checkout. At that moment, he was thinking that he knew the guild, that he had contacted Yoon and he was familiar with their methods. The guild lured hunters with all sorts of bonuses and then slammed the trap, enslaving them under the pretext of debt. In a previous life, this scheme plunged the young man into debt up to his ears, and as a result, he spent all the remaining days on the battlefield. Yoonhee was in a similar situation. She was under pressure from the guild all her life and met death before she reached her potential. The death of may well be one of the 5 misfortunes of Sora, the hero decided. The girl stood and looked at the ice cream in horror with tears in her eyes. Then her father decided to ask Sora what happened. The girl thought she would become an alien, like her mother, having heard earlier the names of the ice cream that her father took for her. He calmed his daughter and picked her up while she was eating ice cream, laughing and talking about the name, which was really funny. The girl was also smiling. She liked that there was a lot of ice cream. The seller gave a big ball of ice cream for the cute reaction of the girl. The young man was thinking about his cute daughter, who went by the jeans in and the girl, meanwhile, interrupted the young man's thoughts by putting ice cream on his cheek. The father could not understand what she wanted from him and thought that the girl did not like the ice cream. Sora just wanted dad to try the ice cream too and smiled at him. Then the hero thought about the fact that Sora never called him dad. Previously, due to the fact that Sojin was so little at home, he returned home late, and the girl was always alone and crying. He practically did not talk to his daughter. He didn't create shared memories and left her even when she needed him the most. The first and last time she called him daddy was a terrible memory, where the girl was taken away from her father and she screamed for help. Buying ice cream for the girl and watching her reaction, Sojin only now found out that Sora loves ice cream, so he considered himself a bad father. It reminded him of how little time he and his daughter spent together. In addition to preventing Sora's misfortunes, our hero decided to create as many happy memories together as possible. And smiling at the girl, he took a taste of ice cream, thanking Sora for it. Just thinking that everything was fine, Sojin heard the sound of a siren, which meant that a sudden rift appeared somewhere. Usually, the location of the crack is calculated in advance, and hunters arrive at the zone of occurrence before this happens. The territory is immediately fenced off and people have to go to the shelter. But this siren that sounded now meant that the rift had opened unexpectedly. The probability of such a crack appearing was very small, but it did not happen in his past life, Sojin thought. The girl looked at her father with fear, and he concentrated on asking Sora to hold on to him tightly and reassured his daughter that everything would be fine. While he was running home, the butterfly effect came to his mind. The fluttering of her wings creates a storm. Inai, who previously did not trust anyone with Sora, unexpectedly left her for Sojin. And now a crack has suddenly appeared all these years because of our hero, because of his interference in the future, something has changed. The hero, with all his thoughts about the changes that were taking place, holding Sora tightly, ran home. Right in front of him at that moment a crack formed and evil spirits climbed out of there, which our hero looked at in horror and despair, and thought that he had not done anything that could lead to this. A cretin bull appeared from the crack, and everyone began to run away in horror. If our hero had caught him before his return, he would have dealt with him immediately, but now the young man was just an ordinary person and, like everyone else, rushed to run, holding Sora in his arms. It was the only thing he was capable of. Sora looked at the bull in horror and warned her father about the danger. The bull attacked the young man with his daughter, but he managed to evade, asking Sora if she was all right. The young man asked his daughter to listen to him very carefully and hide between two houses that were not far from them. The young man asked Sora not to go out until he allowed it. The girl understood everything and ran to where her father said. Sajun, looking at the bull, saw that he was aiming directly at him. The bull was standing across the street from the hero, and as the young man thought, he was going to rush straight at him. The bull went on the attack, and our hero was thinking that if he had at least some kind of weapon and seeing a broom behind him, he decided to rush to her. Grabbing a broom, the bull attacked the hero, and Sora at that moment was watching the situation and worried about her father. Jumping back, the young man survived, but only because he surrounded his body with mana, but there was a limit to everything. Even though Sajun only had a homemade spear in his hands, but he had no choice, he had to fight. The hero couldn't escape right now. After the siren stops, about 5 minutes will pass before the arrival of help, and if he lasts this time, Sora will be saved. Looking at the bull in front of him, our hero thought that these 5 minutes could be the longest in his life. He had every chance to lose his life, but he had to endure, even if he had to spend every last drop of mana, and his body would not stand it. At the beginning of his journey in his previous life, the hero was too weak to become a full-fledged hunter. Because of this, other fighters left him far to spare, and his anxiety grew every day. During the desperate search for a way to survive, the young man studied absolutely all books about monsters. The vulnerability of the cretin bull is its eyes, and at any cost the hero decided to hit it there. Jumping and throwing his spear, the young man decided that he would not allow Sora to live such a life again. He could not collect enough mana with such a body, and did not think that he had hit the target directly. How the young man did it was a mystery to himself. The bull howled in pain, and then the young man saw the magic of ice. The bull was completely distraught, and the young man was thinking about the house that was going to collapse. The house where Sora was hiding, who was now in danger. Sora, who was standing in an alley between collapsing houses, looked at her father in panic when the building began to fall directly on her. But when she opened her eyes, she only found her dad bending over her. All wounded, he asked if Sora was whole. The girl looked at her father in tears that collapsed right with her. At the moment when he almost lost consciousness, he saw a guild that could be trusted with Sora and disconnected. In the evening, in horror, Un came running to the hospital looking for Sora and Sajun. The girl rushed to her mother's arms, and she asked if everything was all right with her. But the girl pointed to her father, who was lying in a hospital bed all bandaged up, and informed her mother that Sora was not injured and therefore she did not need to worry. The girl told her mother that her father was protecting her, and at that moment the girl began to cry. Sajun, seeing this, jumped up from his bed and asked the girl to calm down, because he could even stand and joke that he had gone too far and it was all a joke that he and Sora came up with, for which he immediately received from a girl who was angry at Sajun for being able to joke such things in such a situation. Stupid jokes. In the evening, sitting on a bench outside the hospital, Un thanked Sajun for protecting Sora, but he was her father and therefore wanted to save the girl, asking how she felt now. Uni explained to her father that she had left the girl with her grandmother, who was supposed to look after her, so the wait was fine. The young man, drinking his drink, said that Sora was very scared. It was good that she came to her senses so quickly, but there was something the young man wanted to ask about the girl from Young. When he was fighting with the bull, something strange happened. It seemed to him that someone had used ice magic, and he thought that Sora had done it. Looking at Yoon after the words he said, the young man saw fear on the face of the girl, who just looked at the floor and did not answer anything. The young man asked what Yoon would say to what he thought about Sora. The girl first told Sajun that it was nonsense because the girl could barely say magic and it was a lot of work to connect a couple of words for her, and it was difficult to create a spell herself because the girl was small. The young man looked at her in silence, and he asked me to repeat everything that the girl had said before, but only looking into his eyes. Is it true that it wasn't Sora who did it? The girl turned the glass in her hands and asked if she could trust Sajun. The young man said that Sora was his daughter and he would never do anything that could harm her. She believed the young man, because he believed her when she came to him with Sora and said that this was his daughter. And Yuni said that that magic was probably really Sora and she did it. The girl reminded us why she was on the threshold of our hero. Then they lost their home with their daughter and it was the work of Sora. It all happened when the girl lost control of herself. So far, Yuni thought there was nothing to worry about, but if they found out about it, she was afraid that Sora would be taken to the laboratory. Taking Young's hand, Sajin promised her that he would protect Sora at any cost, because after all, the girl was his daughter. Then Uns asked if the young man allowed the idea that Sora was not his daughter. This made Sajin think for a second, but then he smiled at the girl and said that it was not important. He would not condemn the girl for this. The young man understood that last time he would never have said that and would have denied the existence of Sora from time to time. Yuni laughed and smiled at the young man in a way she had never done before she made him blush and blush. The hero thought to himself that everything was wrong with his head. Before moving to the past body, he was more than 40 years old, and Un is now only 26, and she was old enough to be his daughter, so the young man tried to collect his thoughts. The hero believed that he had no right to these feelings. The young man decided to ask Un how the deal with the guild went, and the girl told him that, as the young man said, there were a lot of slippery moments in the contract. Yuni voiced one problem after another and, saying that she still had a lot of options, slammed the door. Although the girl scattered loud words, but in fact, no other guild made offers to her, and therefore Un did not know what to do. Our hero, upon hearing this, lit up with happiness and said that he would train the girl himself. She only needed to trust him. Sujin promised Yuni to teach her his super secret technique. The girl, laughing and blushing, said that the main super secret for her was the guy himself. The next day, Sajin brought Yuni and Sora to a place he called the Vaunted Secret. It was where he brought the two girls that the workshop was located. Sora and Un looked at the place in surprise, because in front of them was an incomprehensible half-abandoned building that did not look at all like the place they needed. Yuni asked Sajin if workshops weren't usually located in shopping malls or guild buildings. Sajin explained that the prices in shopping malls were inflated and it was necessary to be in a guild to use their weapons. So the hero asked just to trust him. Arriving at the warehouse on it, a lot of weapons were found and Un was surprised to see a place that was really a workshop. Sora rushed to the objects, calling them charm, and was all glowing with happiness. An elderly man immediately came out to them and asked what the young people wanted. The young man was glad to himself because they had come to the right place. While Sajin was in the hospital, he had time to sort out his memories before he returned to the past, and then the guy remembered this man who had just greeted them. He was a blacksmith, who was nicknamed the Lord of Iron Kang Koli for his merits. The young man greeted the man and introduced himself, said that he wanted to become a hunter. Un looked at him point blank and then, after greeting him, also introduced herself and said that she wanted to be a hunter. The daughter looked at her parents with a questioning look, and then introduced herself as the daughter of her parents. The man laughed, looking at the whole family. In his opinion, they knew a lot about greeting. And the man introduced himself as Kang Koli and asked to be called that. The young man explained to their new acquaintance that they would like to become hunters, and the man finished the young man's sentence with the words that they needed weapons for this and asked what type of young people preferred. Our hero preferred the spear. The girl has not yet decided when she was asked and asked to give her a little time to look around. The weapons are made of mithril and various materials from the dungeons, said Kang Kol. Even for a beginner, it will be easy to handle this. The young man looked at the beautiful swords and a spear in front of him, and the man realized that he was well versed in weapons, while the girl looked thoughtfully at what she had to choose. And then turning to Unha, the hero offered her a bow. The young man explained his choice by the fact that the girl was able to concentrate and reason sensibly, and therefore the bow was an ideal option. Once asked if she would be able to wield a bow, then Kang offered the girl to make a couple of test shots. The girl decided that she would just trust Sajin and take the bow, because our hero clearly knew what he was talking about. Kang reported that the guys could not return the money or make a refund of the weapon if they changed their minds, but it was always possible to exchange it for free in his workshop. The heroes agreed to Kang Kol's demands, and then the man handed them the price for everything after looking at the check. Un decided that it was very expensive, but Sajin said he would pay for everything, because he had a stash and he promised earlier that he would help. The girl looked at her parents, who were arguing about money, because Un wanted to return everything to Sajin, and no matter how much it was, and our hero certainly did not consider her obliged to do this. Then Sora, asking her mother, said that if she needed a lot of money, the girl would not eat sweets. Un asked Sora not to say such a thing, and our hero was immediately puzzled and remembered their conversation with Un at the hospital. It was not visible from Sora, but it seems that she is just a very attentive and kind child. But for her mother she is too old for her years, in which the children were still capricious, but probably it was because they always lived in need. And Yoonhee wanted Sora to have everything, whatever she wants. Then Kang said that Grandpa was obliged to treat Sora with sweets and handed out a check. Kang said that he liked the family very much, and especially the charming daughter of the guys, and therefore he decided to give them a discount. Crossing out the old price on the receipt, he wrote a new one and handed it to the heroes again. They looked in surprise at the man who was so kind to them and took pity, making a discount. It was clear that they were now paying only for the cost of materials. And then Grandpa asked if they were buying or not, because he had been holding the check for a very long time, and his hand could fall off right now. The guys were grateful for such a discount, and after buying weapons they left the workshop satisfied. It was already sunset on the street, and the heroes were walking home. Sajin thought that now they had weapons and they could move on according to plan. Young and his daughter were walking behind him, and the young man, calling the girl, suggested that she train together to go to the dungeon. He was very happy looking at Yoonhee, who was next to him. Yoonhee was running with a bow in her hand and aiming at a tree that had a target on it. But by concentrating and using mana, she was able to hit the target by punching through the tree. Sajin saw it and was surprised that the girl broke through the tree. Sajin was looking at Yoonhee, and Sora was standing next to him and smiling happily at her mother. The hero brought a snack and offered Yoonhee a break. After sitting down in the forest, they had a picnic and decided to take a break, having a snack of tteokbokki and sauce. Yoonhee liked the place for training, where there was no one, and asked Sajin how the young man found out about him. Sajin replied that it was another of his secrets, a space hidden in the depths of the mountains, where the young man trained before returning to the past. In a few weeks, the young man taught Un basic fighting skills. For example, the hero showed Un how to hold a bow on his back with mana. They spent a lot of time together and were able to practice before going to the dungeon. The young man was sitting opposite Un and was amazed that the girl managed to pierce through the tree, and decided to clarify whether the girl was holding a bow for the first time or not. In the past, due to the rules of the guild, Yang had to wield only a sword, but not having the talent to wield this very sword, she constantly broke it in the middle of battle. One day, Un picked up the bow of a fallen partner and her talent showed up, Sajin recalled. They were sitting in the forest, and the young man asked how the mana control training was progressing at Un. The girl did not work out very well. She tried to concentrate mana, as Sajin said, but it turned out only once. The girl didn't know if she would be able to go to the dungeon with such skills. Then Sora, who was looking at her parents, told her mother that she could do what her father said and said that she could teach her. Sajin turned to Sora with a question, and the girl said about mana. The next moment Sora showed her skills, and the excited Sajin and Un were already looking at their child's skills with apprehension. The young man, stroking the girl on the head and praising her, asked her to disperse mana, because it was dangerous. The girl, smiling, immediately obeyed her father, and then mana turned into beautiful dust. The girl jumped up and ran to look at mana, which scattered like thousands of stars, and Un and Sajin realized that they had to be on guard for the good of their daughter. The guys were thinking who they could leave her for while they were in the dungeon, because taking their daughter to such a dangerous place was not the best decision for parents. Then Sajin remembered someone he could rely on and asked him not to worry about Yoonhee. No matter how much the young man tried to turn the present for his own good, relying on knowledge about the future, everything always went smoothly. Sajin was sitting on his knees, and his daughter was peeking over the young man's shoulder. The young man thought that the one he was addressing would agree as soon as he saw Sora and greeted his father. The same did not agree on the phone when the hero called him, but the young man did not expect that his father would not even raise an eyebrow at the sight of Sora. The father sat and looked at his son in silence. After a long pause, the father asked Sajin whose daughter it was, and then the young man immediately replied that Sora was his daughter. But the father did not ask about the young man, but about the mother. Then Sajin reminded his father about Anhe, and his father remembered a sweet girl with whom his son had once introduced him. Immediately after the information passed to him, the father asked when the wedding would be at the young people, and our hero replied that he had just proposed to the girl, and that she had not yet agreed. The father was confused by the fact that they had not planned the wedding yet, but when Sajin said that the girl did not agree, the father was furious with this, and the young man tried to calm him down, saying that he would explain everything later, because now he came to ask for a favor. And pointing at the girl behind his back, he introduced Sora to her grandfather. The man held out his hand to the girl and introduced himself as Jaewon, which confused Sora because usually everyone admired her appearance and cute face. Then grandfather stretched out his hand to her tender cheeks and was stunned with delight that he did not even utter a word when Sora called him grandfather. But after that, the old man came to his senses, and the young man asked him if he could look after Sora while he and Un were gone. Grandfather clarified what the young man wanted from him, and it was just about the weekend. Then, hearing notes of reflection in his head, the hero began to say that he would try to look for someone else, but his father did not say that he was against it and hugged Sora. After the visit to the grandfather, our heroes met in the store, and Un sadly thought that she should have gone with the young man to his father. But Sajin told the girl that no one knew how he could react to her, and it seemed to the young man that the grandfather was crazy about Sora, which calmed his mother. Standing at the window, the consultant girl showed the young couple the bracelet they ordered. The young man, thanking the consultant, put the bracelet on his hand, and Un wondered if the bracelet contained exactly the stone that Sora found. The stone looked beautiful in the bracelet, and the mother's statement was true. It was the light of mana. When the guys were in the workshop, Sora found something so amazing that Kang himself did not see. When Grandpa asked what the girl liked and that he would give her anything she wanted, the girl saw a sparkling thing in the coals, which she pointed to with her finger. But at first Kang did not understand what Sora was talking about because there was only garbage in front of him. But after he said that Sora had found a treasure, Sajin looked into the box and saw the light of mana. This is a stone that begins to shine when it detects mana nearby. It is used to search for artifacts in dungeons, so its price was not small. Taking the Sora stone, she immediately gave it to her father, but he refused because it was her gift. But the girl saw how his father wanted him and therefore gave the stone to him, because the girl was just interested to find out what kind of sparkle it was and she didn't need it at all. Sajin was beaming with joy. Standing at the window, Un asked Sajin if they had only come for the bracelet. The young man told the girl that the bracelet could only be made here and it was necessary before going to the dungeon. But since they were here, the hero offered to look at some clothes for Sora. Even though he was not here for that at all, Sajin thought to himself. Then they were interrupted by screams, and the guys saw a young man who was walking along the red carpet under the flashes of cameras and who was met by fans. It was Suhan's dream. Un asked if the young man was the same Hunter TV star, and the hero looked at the guy sadly and with contempt said that it was a dream of Suhan himself, a famous hunter advertising his guild via TV. The guy became famous thanks to his beautiful appearance. When she saw Sajin's reaction to the guy, she thought that something was bothering him and remembered that quite recently the young man had suffered protecting Sora, and maybe he was afraid to go to the dungeon. Then uncalming the hero said that she would protect him. The young man could not understand which sister was in question, because they were the same age. The young man just didn't want to cross paths with that guy. Leaving the scene, the hero looked at Suhan's dream. This guy was a master of the Knights Guild, which was engaged in extorting a debt from Yang. While distracting the young man from his thoughts, she asked if they had bought everything and how much time was left before the formation of the dungeon. The young man said that there was very little left, looking at his phone. As soon as 2 o'clock struck, the floor under the guys began to collapse. Yuni thought it was an earthquake, but the young man knew that they were already closed. Everyone around did not expect this and a chasm formed in the middle of the shopping center. Sajin knew he shouldn't have let his guard down, because this was just the beginning. Holding a spear in his hands, the young man looked at the crack that had formed. The bracelet on the young man's arm glowed more than before, and Yuni did not understand what the young man meant by saying that this was just the beginning. But then there was another burst of energy, and the system reported that the dungeon was created. The launch of the special quest has begun. The people sitting near the crack saw 100 sparkling eyes and began to run away. These eyes belonged to the evil spirits that crawled out of the crack. They looked like giant spiders with glowing purple shells. Our heroes grabbed their weapons, the young man for a spear and the girl for a bow and arrows. The dungeon was already here and they had to clean it up in the destroyed mall. And all this 100 spiders moved on the inhabitants and our heroes. Everyone rushed from the crack and ran screaming about monsters who were. But after trying to escape from the mall, people found that the doors to it were locked and asked to be released, begging, because someone was with children and someone and everything did not want to part with life in the mall in this way. Yunhee asked Sajin what they were going to do and how they would clear this building of monsters, which turned out to be too many. But our hero was already jumping into the thick of things and Un was shouting after him. Sajin jumped down from the 2nd floor and saw a guy asking for help, and there were several spiders in front of him. But Sajin instantly killed them and saved the guy, offering him to run to the exit, because the hunters will soon arrive. He thanked the hero with tears in his eyes and ran to the exit. Standing at the bottom, our hero asked Un to go down to him, and said that if they unite with hunters, it will be easier to deal with monsters. Sajin was standing at the bottom and clutching his spear, having just saved a young man who was running to the exit. Yoonhee looked at him and was preparing to go down to the hero too. Sun Sehyun, with a stony face, defeating monsters, saved people and then asked the hunters to concentrate on the monsters, otherwise the building would collapse. At that moment, a girl clung to him, who was afraid of the monster and asked to get her out of here, which greatly annoyed the hunter and he pushed her right into the monster's paws. The guys, seeing this, hurried to her. The girl was calling for help, and Sajin was thinking about Sohyun's act, which doomed the girl to suffering. She sat and helplessly covered her face with her hands, in front of the monster that was ready to attack her. But at that moment another hunter came to the rescue. It was a girl. Our hero wondered why she was here. Ko Hween, the huntress who held the line until the end of the world and who shouldn't be here right now. Sajin asked himself to stop flying in the clouds. She looked at the young man, and he asked all the hunters to gather in a circle with civilians in the center, offering to become a protective wall for civilians. And I asked the guys not to panic and concentrate on their work. They were all standing with their backs to each other at that moment. All of them fought monsters that attacked hunters from different sides. The last monster was defeated, and everyone exhaled. Our hero asked if Un was okay. The girl, smiling, said that she was fine, but her legs were not holding her. Sohyun stood behind the guys and recalled recent events. When they came to the guild, they greeted him like a master, and the man who conducted the interview with Un reported that one promising hunter almost swallowed the bait, holding Un's resume. The man also said that the girl found all the disadvantages in the contract, which was kept silent. Sohyun walked up to Yoonhee and smiling, thanked the girl for her hard work and complimenting how incredible the girl was. Un thanked the young man without much enthusiasm. And immediately Sajin came to the fore to meet him, offering to shake hands with each other. Our hero, smiling, introduced himself and was glad to meet. The young man also introduced himself to our hero. Sajin saw the young man even inflamed with anger when he shook his hand. Then a young mother ran up to them and begged them to save her child. The child was bitten and the boy was poisoned by an earth spider. Our hero, sitting on his knees next to him, said that if help was provided quickly, the child would survive. The young man explained to his mother that the exit would open only after a complete cleaning of the dungeon, and if now they would defeat the boss. But without finishing, Sohyun appeared behind and expressed his protest. Sohyun said that the exit itself will open in 24 hours. Did Sajin seriously want to kill the boss with so many people? Sajin said that there were enough of them, and the child would not be able to wait that long. Even if he received first aid, he would not make it to the arrival of an ambulance. Then Sohyun called the hero a novice, because he would never go into the dungeon, about which he knows nothing, and offered to shove the young man his arrogance far away, and decided to stay there. Yoonhee wanted to say how ugly Sohyun was, because he didn't even want to try to save the child, and the guards pretended not to notice anything. The bitter truth was that Song Sehyun only went into battle when there were escape routes. The boy was bandaged, and that was all that could be done to make the child last a little longer. Then someone's voice said that he would go with them, and our heroes turned around and saw Ko Hween, who was introduced to the guys, because they were not familiar yet. The young man knew that he was definitely not mistaken about her. Yoonhee was smiling at the girl. In the past, when this dungeon opened, it was cleared by Ko Hween and Sun Sehyun after opening the exit. Song Sehyun told Ko Hween that he was disappointed and did not think that the girl fought so immaturely. Perhaps she wanted to go to the next world so much. The young man asked her. The girls looked at Suhyun's dream and were silent. Then Ko Hween asked him not to yap, because how he himself had not yet died with such strength was unclear to anyone. Hearing such an attack from a girl, he caught fire. Sajin, asking if everyone was ready, commanded that they were going. He and the two girls behind him were standing in front of the dungeon. To clean up the dungeon-destroyed shopping center was our hero's mission, and he bravely, accompanied by two girls, was ready to do it. After going down, Yoonhee asked what it was like to glow on the columns that were in the dungeon. It was the luminescent moss that grew in the darkest places of the dungeon. He was everywhere here. The girls walked side by side and smiling sweetly. Ko Hween told Yoonhee that she did not look like a beginner at all, but more like a seasoned hunter. Yoonhee was embarrassed by such compliments. Ko Hween thought to herself that Yoonhee and Sajin were amazingly capable for the first battle, looking at both of them. Especially Lee Saju. The young man was not only an excellent fighter, but also a skillful strategist. Then the girl decided to offer an idea, namely to choose a commander before the battle. At her suggestion, the guys turned to the girl who was walking behind them. The commander had to monitor the situation and give orders, and the girl considered herself not very suitable for such a role. Yuni also considered herself unsuitable for this role, and could not take such responsibility. Then, Ko Hween offered Sajin to take on such a role, because in her mind the girl believed that the young man had the makings of a true leader. Sajin was thinking to himself what a cunning girl was in front of him. The fact was that Hween was probing the ground in order to fully assess the abilities of our hero, and he decided that it was impossible to stand out too much, otherwise the young man would have a lot of problems later. Exhaling, the hero, of course, pretended that it was not his at all, but since both girls could not, he agreed to take on this role. The young man decided to pretend to be an amateur and lull the girls' vigilance. Yuni said that they were counting on him, and since they had decided everything, Sajin believed that it was possible to move forward. But only they went forward, and the young man felt that the boss was here. Ahead of them was a large pit in which a slug was lying. Ko Hween was asking how the boss could be a slug. After all, every novice could cut it, the girl thought. VNHE stood behind and just looked at the monster, and Sajin believed that the girl should not underestimate the slug, because he was still the boss and apparently for a reason. The girl started commanding them to figure it out quickly, but Sajin reminded her that the captains had chosen him. Slugs reacted to vibrations coming from the ground, so it was necessary to descend carefully. Then, Ko Hween decided to go first and stepping carefully jumped down into the pit. Yuni went down the rope and asked Sajin when she could do it. The young man explained to the girl that they needed a couple more workouts for this. Then the rope broke and Un fell to the floor hitting hard, thereby creating a strong vibration. Ko Hween thought it wasn't scary, even if the slug was healthy, but it had to be slow like a turtle. At that moment, the girl saw how quickly the slug approached Un. But our hero picked up the girl in time and saved her. In horror, the two of them looked at the boss with whom they had to fight. Ko Hween thought it was impossible. In front of them was a monster that looked like a skeleton, and its bones were wrapped in slime. The boss started attacking the hunters blindly with all his might. Even though he was blind, he could feel the vibration perfectly. Hunters hid from the slug behind a stone wall. Sajin thought that everything was going according to the plan they had discussed earlier before going down. The guys were sitting and Sajin was talking about the weakness of slugs. It was fire. If you break the shell, not for long, but the boss core will be vulnerable. The young man and Hween will take care of it, and Yuni will be left behind. In case of danger, the girl had to cover Sajin and Hween and set fire to the monster. The young man thought that if the monster continues to attack furiously, the hero will not even be able to throw a bottle, let alone attack. It's no use sitting. Anyway, soon the monster will break the wall behind which the hunters were sitting and hiding from the monster. They needed to carry out their plan. Ko Hween, shaking hands, thought that it was just necessary to distract the monster, and only she of all knew how to create earthquakes with mana and asked to provide it to her. Concentrating mana in her legs, the girl said that she had no equal in endurance and she ran to distract the monster, creating an earthquake. The monster tried to break the wall without getting a meter closer. The girl continued to slip away. Watching the reaction, the girl saw that the monster has a large attack radius, but cannot move from its place. The girl felt like a trapped mouse. Taking the sword out of its scabbard, Hween thought about what if she could cut the shell and get to the core. Sajin, watching the girl and preparing for his role, saw a familiar stand. Fatal Fault, the technique that Hween used before his return. Using this technique, the girl attacked the boss, and in Sajin's memory, the girl could cut anything without flinching. But in this time span, her swordsman's skill left much to be desired. The girl attacked the boss and tried to hit him with her attack. Perseverance poured over the edge, despite the fact that the girl was shaking all over and the sword was about to break. While attacking the boss, Hween thought about how fast the slug was recovering, and that her sword didn't have long left. At that moment, the slug began to attack her, and the girl realized that it was already too late. The young man's attack came into play, and our hero threw the bottle that he had previously held in his hands. There was oil in the bottle, which poured out on the monster. The closer the mucus was to the core, the stronger it was. If the acidity is higher than that of other relatives, that's why the sword crumbles, the young man Hween explained. First it was necessary to expose the outer shell. The girl said that it was easy for Sajin to judge, because she was almost sent to the next world by a monster, and she thanked the young man for saving her life. It was too early to thank, and the young man offered to leave. The monster was furious, and the girl, noticing this, informed our hero that the slug was fiercer than before. The young man said that apparently everything was because of the bottle that he threw at him. HV asked about the next plan of action after they poured oil on the monster. The young man, running away with HV, said that maybe the monster would not let them pour themselves. But while they were running, an attack was being prepared for HV from behind. The young man warned her, but he was afraid that with such a sword the girl would not be able to repel the attack. But then came to the rescue by setting fire to the arrow and attacked the slug. It burst into flames. In case of danger, needed to cover them and set fire to the monster, as the young man had said earlier. She had to do it with an arrow loaded with mana. It was the easiest way. Yunhee was worried that she would not be able to cope, because she never practiced, and did not succeed in owning mana, thinking that she would not succeed. The young man took the girl by the shoulder and confidently told her that she could. Training in the battle with the spiders, the girl overcame everything and Sajin asked to believe in himself. And Yunhee, believing, fired the same arrow loaded with mana directly at the monster. Hweon saw the core after her attack, and the young man commanded that they needed to attack faster until he recovered. Then Yunhee launched another arrow. The slug tried to fight back, but it didn't work out. Un's arrows repelled all his attempts. Then Sajun and Hweon rushed to attack him, exposing their weapons. After charging his spear with mana, our hero jumped to the very goal and finding the core in the slug's head, he attacked it, hitting the target. There were a lot of people on the surface, along with reporters and local news. Reporters reported they were near the dungeon. The entrance to the supermarket Darien was blocked. Correspondents reported on the news. The building was surrounded by the victims' families waiting for news. According to experts, the dungeon will disappear tomorrow afternoon if it is not cleared earlier. Grandpa and Sora came to see the dungeon and the whole situation, who tried to find out from him where they had come. The father recalled a conversation with his son, asking where the guys were going. He heard in response from Sajin that the young man was going to the mall with for work, that there was not far away. At that moment the young man was stroking Sora on the head. Grandfather was surprised to find out that there was a shopping center nearby, and looked at his son, who was sitting next to his daughter, taking a spear and hanging it behind his back. The young man told his father that this shopping center had only recently opened and it was called Darien, saying goodbye to his father and opening the door. The young man already reported this information at the door and promised to return. Grandfather thought with pain in his heart about what could have happened and pressed the girl sitting in his arms. At that moment, he heard that the entrance had just opened and civilians and Hunter Sun Sahyun were coming out of it. The young man smiled at all the spectators, and the rest of the people followed him. Standing in the crowd, Grandpa was watching who was coming out, and then Sora was smiling and pointing at Mom and Dad. All three guys got out unharmed and sighed heavily after the work done. Seeing Sora calling her parents, the guys smiled and opened their arms to meet their joyful daughter running to them. Sora hugged her parents and Sajun and were happy to see the girl. They asked their daughter how she got here and if she came by herself. Hweon stood behind the guys and looked questioningly at the whole scene with the child in front of her. Going to the guys, the girl asked whose child it was and Sajun told her that it was their daughter Sora. Asking about her daughter, the girl wanted to know if Sajun and were married, to which our hero could not give an unambiguous answer. Sora looked at Hweon with her big beautiful eyes and greeted her, calling Hweon a sweet aunt, for which she immediately gained trust in her heart, because Sora was very sweet and charmed everyone around her. The girl started asking what Sora loved and Sajun realized that another fighter had fallen before his daughter's charm. Sora, hugging her parents, pointed to her grandfather standing in the crowd and said that she had come with him. The young man's father stood quietly in the crowd and watched the picture of the reunion of his daughter and parents after the weekend. It was clear from Grandpa's face that Sajun was in trouble because he was very angry. The next day, a 6-year-old boy was broadcast on the news, the one who was bitten by a spider, and there was one chance to save the child if the guys fought the monster. A boy who was sitting on a hospital bed and told about how he was scared and hurt, but his aunt and uncle saved him. The child smiled and thanked them. Grandpa was looking at the guys in front of him. A little boy was being shown on the TV behind him. The job of a hunter seemed promising because it is full of privileges, but all hunters risk their lives protecting people from monsters. In front of him were Sora and Sajun playing with Sora, and he was thinking about their future. Pressing his hand and closing his eyes, the young man's father thought that the young man and the girl had both gone hunting. They weren't officially there yet, but with their exploits, it was only a matter of time. He didn't know whether to rejoice or cry. After all, they have already started talking about the guys on TV. Then the father decided to ask the young man a question about Sora, whether they would take care of the child on his shoulders every time. The young man sat and thought about it. On the other hand, holding the girl on her lap, she looked at Sajun, who was thinking to himself about a babysitter for Sora, whom he never found. At first, the grandfather looked at the young man with an evil look, but then sighed and said that he would take care of the girl. The young man asked if his father would be able to, and he agreed, because the girl was, according to him, a nice granddaughter. And after that, he asked Yoonhee to talk face to face. Having called the girl for a private conversation, the young man's father said that he did not force the girl to marry, but wanted to find out if the girl did not like Sajun. Then she explained that everything was wrong, rather it was even the opposite. That, overjoyed, grandfather wanted the young man to lure him to him, and they got married as soon as possible. The girl was embarrassed by her grandfather's words. Then, putting his hands on the girl's shoulders, the boy's father told her that he was aware of her situation. Yoonhee recalled how she gave birth to Sora alone, and no one visited her in the hospital. The girl's parents left this world early, and the child's father also disappeared. Everyone was discussing Yoonhee in the hospital, who was alone with the child. It was all the girl's stubbornness that she was thinking about. How badly the girl broke up with Sajun, and the fact that giving birth to Sora was only her decision. She was sure she could handle it on her own. She worked and studied a lot. Sometimes the work was difficult, and at these moments the girl remembered Sajun 1,000 times, but firmly drove away these thoughts. Even when Sora was sick, the girl abandoned all her affairs and ran to the hospital with her daughter. Time passed, and the desire to contact Sajun grew, but it was too late. I remembered moments with Sora. The girl was kind and sympathetic, but sometimes her powers got out of control, and then it seemed to the mother that the whole world was looking at her child with an unfavorable look. The girl decided that she would protect her daughter herself, talking to Sora, asked not to show her powers to anyone except her mother, and the girl thought that it would be their secret with her mother. Smiling, Mom said that it would be their special secret just for two. The girl was crying, relaxing and giving free rein to emotions. The young man's father said that the girl was her daughter, but she was also Sajun's daughter and was now grandfather's granddaughter, and he asked me to trust them and let go of this heavy burden. The young man's father asked him to share the hardships of life with them, because Sajun also wanted this. At that moment, Sajun was sitting with his daughter and watching her play. Mom came into the room and the girl ran to her. Seeing her mother, the girl ran up to her and asked if she was crying and wiping her eyes. The girl explained that everything was fine. The young man was surprised by the girl's reaction, and when he saw his father, he looked at him with the same evil look, but he assured that he had not said anything to the girl. Yoonhee smiled at Sajun and hugged her daughter, saying that everything was fine. The father looked at the guys and asked them what they planned to do. The young man was surprised and at first did not understand what his father meant, but then explained to him, looking at and Sora, that they planned to get hunting licenses. The girl also looked at Sajun and holding Sora in her arms looked surprised. The ruins of the world, ice floes stuck out from everywhere, and our hero made his way through the snow and blizzard. There was not a soul on the street. Ahead of him, he saw Sora sitting on the ground, an adult Sora. The girl asked why and why the young man saved her. The hero could not utter a word. Whether he was physically unable to speak, whether he was making up an excuse, he could only stand and look at Sora with his eyes. Sora, concentrating her magic in her hands, told her father, with anger in her voice, that he considered her pathetic. Then the girl confessed that she despised Lee Sajun, that is, him, her father. And after that, the daughter attacked her father with ice magic, which she owned. Shards of ice rained down on the hero and then he woke up, because the voice was calling him Dad. Then the hero reported that he had already woken up. Sora was sitting on his bed, and the hero himself was trying to move away from the dream that had just ended. Sora woke up her father and asked him to get up, because the sun had already risen and sent greetings. The young man, getting out of bed, saw looking in and asked her if he had slept for so long. But the girl just offered him to take a shower and sit down to eat. Today it was possible to take a break from training. Yoonhee asked Sajun if he had nightmares, because the young man did not sleep well last night. And at that moment, the hero was trying to remember what he had dreamed last night. Lying in bed, our hero looked at his bank account, which had about $250 left. Money was running out. Sajun knew that when they got hunting licenses, he and would have a small income, but it would not be immediately, considering that before the certification it is necessary to eat something. Interrupting his thoughts, Yoonhee wanted to come into the room, asking what Sajun and Sora were doing. The happy hero replied to Yoonhee that he had Sora therapy, to lie on a soft bed with his dear Sora, what the young man could still dream of. At this moment, the hero was rubbing the cheeks of his cute daughter, and Un was standing next to the bed and watching the picture. Without thinking twice, she asked the guys to get up, because they had just had breakfast. The girl threw the guys out of bed and hitting the floor. The young man saw $1 million on his account. He received a transfer from Ko Hwin. Un also received a translation. The girl answered the phone and there a female voice asked if it was Hwin. The same in turn found out if the money had come to her sister. The girl asked where Hwin had so much money from, and the girl said that she had messed up these in the dungeon. Then Hwin informed the guys that since they had not yet become hunters and had not received a license, members of her guild made these translations for them. The girl asked what messed up meant and Sojin explained that this is when they collect the cores of defeated monsters and other useful bonuses from their bodies. Ko Hwin heard Sojin and asked if the young man had also received a transfer. The monsters turned out to be completely ordinary, so the guys didn't earn much. Sojin replied that $1 million was also a decent amount. Hwin reported that licensed hunters receive many times more. The girl kept a booklet at hand and informed the guys that the hunter exam was coming soon, and they were supposed to turn it in this month. The hunter's exam exists to evaluate the abilities of people who have chosen the path of the hunter for themselves and allow them to become full-fledged hunters. The exam consisted of 3 parts, as the delivery of the rites, the written part, the individual exam, the final test. Those who have passed the test and received a license are granted not only the right to use all the advantages of the profession, the same loot, for example, but also recognition as official hunters. After telling about this, Hwin asked about the date of the exams in order to come to support Yoonhee and Sojin, and she was also ready to look after Sora while she was there. The young man, listening to the conversation of the girls, because it was on speakerphone, thought that the real Ko Hwin was very different from the one he remembered. Maybe the girl was pursuing some ulterior motives. For example, the desire to attract them to your guild. In fact, it sounds tempting, Sojin thought. After all, this guild was in the top of the best guilds in Korea. But the young man decided not to get ahead of himself with his thoughts. After the conversation, the young man thought that he could no longer think about every amount of money spent. There was still a lot of time before the exam, and after exchanging glances, the same thought came to the heroes. After looking at their daughter, they wanted to go together to get clothes for Sora. The girl was happy. The day of the exam came and Sora was left alone with Ko Hwin. Sitting in the girl's arms, she waved to her parents and smiled, wishing good luck on the exam. They smiled back at their daughter and also waved goodbye. Hwin was thinking about how Sora was wearing new clothes, although any outfit looked great on the girl. Yoonhee looked at Sojin and asked if the young man could cope with the written part, because he had trained so much that he didn't have time to prepare for the written part at all. It won't be possible to catch up quickly. The young man smiled at Un and said that he would cope, because he had prepared in advance. To himself, the hero thought that before returning to the past, he had failed this exam countless times. He always got the maximum points for the written part, as if he knew the answers in advance. But due to lack of strength, he always failed the second stage. When he did get a license, it was possible to understand by his appearance at what price the hero got it, that he was all exhausted and bruised from fighting. Looking at Yoonhee, the young man could see that she was very worried. It would be bad if the girl had to take the exam in such a state, and the young man decided to offer her to argue. Then Sojin offered to bet her on who would get the highest score for the written part, and the one who lost would fulfill the winner's wish. Yoonhee saw that since Sojin was arguing with her, the young man was confident of his victory. Yoonhee agreed to the argument with her eyes burning with delight. After that, she asked Sojin to get ready to fulfill the wish. The young man believed that the more you brag, the more you will regret it later. The girl, of course, did not take his words seriously. The operation to prevent Sora from becoming a villain has officially begun. In order for Sora not to have to go through 5 misfortunes in the future, it is necessary to lay the foundation for avoiding the events preceding them. So the parents will make sure that she will be happy. Young and Sojin were firmly confident in each other and their capabilities. Our hero was ready to make his daughter's life only better. The House of the Koryo Sword. The young man informed the elderly warrior that the certification of hunters, which he was talking about, was about to begin. The old man, rubbing his mustache, was thinking about his own. The young man, an employee of the security service, reported that it was necessary to prepare the car. The old man reported that this was not necessary, it was not so far to go, and he would prefer to walk. Everyone was congratulated on the successful completion of the first test. The guys passed the written test. It wasn't too difficult for Sojin and Un. The examiner reported that there was an artificial monster behind him, imitating those with whom the hunters would have to fight. The staff called him a scarecrow. The stage was considered passed if the participants cut off the monster for a certain time and did not get serious injuries. They will be watched by representatives of various guilds. This is a great opportunity to prove yourself in battle and get into the guild. If there are no more questions, then it was possible to start the exam. The first participant from the D team starts the exam. The first participant did not pass. The next command is D. The sixth participant. Next came the 12th participant. All participants lost to the scarecrow, which defeated one less by another. Representatives from the guild believed that there was no one with outstanding skills. One of them talked about what he could understand when the hunters failed after a couple of seconds, but giving up before the fight was too much. Representatives of the guild sat and watched the fight, choosing for themselves new participants whom they could lure to themselves. The woman turned her attention to the man who was a holy sword master from the house of the Koryo sword. It was his first time as an observer at the exam, as one of the representatives of the guild noticed. Calm dream. On the day the world collapsed, he saved humanity from absolute annihilation. The guild founded by him, the House of the Koryo Sword, is known all over the world. His skills are not inferior to fame. Starting a conversation about hunters first of all, they remember who Sonya is. It seemed that this time it was possible not to even look at the participants. And everyone agreed with this opinion. Talented people will be invited to the Guild of the Master of the Sword. All representatives believed. Would anyone choose their guild instead of the most famous guild in the world? Some wanted to know why Komsung decided to appear here for the first time. Because he had never appeared here before. Why there was such a change. Someone heard that he came here at the request of his granddaughter, who was in the news. As soon as this was said, the granddaughter called her grandfather, the very same person, and reported that she was here. Komsung's granddaughter was Ko Hween. Coming with Sora, Grandpa asked Hween what kind of child it was, and then the girl said that it was the daughter of friends, and she looked after her while her parents were taking the exam. A man with a stone face looked at Sora, and she looked at him curiously and then called him Santa Claus because Kom's son had white hair and a white beard. The man introduced himself by name and said that, unfortunately, there was no Santa Claus. The girl was upset to report that her name was Sora. All the observers from the guilds admired this cute moment. Ko Hween asked her grandfather what he thought about the examinees, and he replied that hunters were no good. But the one who had just finished was somewhat interesting, reported Kom's son. Sora pressed against the glass and watched what was happening. Mom came out for the exam. The examiner reported that the 28th participant from the D team entered the fight, and the time allotted to him was 16 seconds. And having fought the monster, the girl won. The young man praised Uni for the fact that she coped with the task perfectly and passed it. The girl replied that everything was thanks to hard training and wished good luck to Sajun. There was a scarecrow in front of the young man, and our hero was ready for battle. He took his spear and activated mana. I decided that I would finish as soon as possible. The examiner commanded that the 29th participant of the D team came out to fight. The scarecrow, flashing its eyes, looked at the hero, and the examiner commanded that the test of the young man began. At that moment the robot rushed to attack our hero. The young man stood and looked at the robot, and the representatives of the guild did not understand what was wrong with him and why he was standing rooted to the spot. Was it because of fear he could not move? Some decided and continued to observe the situation. He's analyzing the enemy and the situation right now, thought Comer and his granddaughter. Having passed this test countless times in his past life, he learned the weak point of the scarecrow. When he rushed to attack the hero and loaded his fist directly into the young man, but missed, and our hero escaped the blow by rolling on his back under the robot itself. This is a huge hole in the armor that imitates a real golem, and he found a weak spot. Everyone knows that the weak point of the scarecrow is the joints. Why is Sajun just dodging and that's it? Ko Hween thought. The young man was dodging again, and the girl was thinking that maybe the guy had another strategy in mind. Then Ko Hween and Komsung, watching the young man closely, saw how he jumped on the robot and hit his weak spot. Having picked up the protection, the young man got to the filling of the robot and tore out its core. All the guild observers were shocked by what Sajun had done. Komsung and his granddaughter, watching this battle, were also very surprised. The core of the effigy was in the hands of our hero, and the robot, howling, crumbled, and the hero landed smoothly on his feet using mana. The examiner announced the Team D and the 29th participant. The time was 14 seconds and it was a victory. All the other hunters, looking at the young man, thought about how incredible he was. Sajun ran up to Yunhei and they shook hands. Komsung reported that for the sake of this man, his granddaughter called him. Ko Hveen said that this guy was irresistible. Dream said that it was one thing to discover a weakness, but from beginning to end to think through a strategy how to pull out the core, it was a talent. Sun looked at the smiling young man. The most delicious snacks and dishes were on the table and the guys were congratulated on passing the exam. They probably got hungry after the exams. Usually such events pulled out all the forces. Sora was also nearby and looked at the table full of goodies with eyes sparkling with happiness. Ko Hweon held a feast in honor of Sojun and Inai. The girl said that she pays for everything and therefore asked the heroes to fly into the food, smiling at both and pointing at the table. Yoonhee, sitting next to her daughter across from Hween, reported that it seemed to her that the restaurant was very expensive. But the girl said that everything had already been paid for and that she would treat her when she became a hunter. Eunhee, confused by her conversations, said that the next time the food was on her, Sojun watched their conversation from the side and tried to analyze it. The young man thought that the girl was going to invite them to her guild and decided for himself that perhaps he was too suspicious of Ko Hween. Sojun believed that a good attitude towards him, along with a sense of gratitude, also causes anxiety, as if there is some hidden motive in this. Not only because he remembered what Ko Hwang was like before returning to the past, but also because Kam Song is her grandfather. It seemed that the girl had no hidden intentions and perhaps our hero was overly wound up by virtue of being in the past. Here his thoughts about the girl were interrupted by Ko Hwen herself, saying that she was interested in something and she wanted to find out from Sojun. Sojun listened to her attentively and then Hveen asked about the weapons that the guys used and asked where it was from. The young man decided that if he introduced them to each other, it would only be a matter of time before Kam Sun and Kang Chul got to know each other. The first-class hunter of the first generation is Kam Song and the best blacksmith in the world is Kang Kal. But this was going to happen much later in the future. Ko Hween, who was looking at him, was all attention. Sitting in the room and looking at the phone, the hero was thinking, and then came up to him and put a cold bottle scared our hero. Although the girl just wanted to ask if the young man was very busy. Then he was embarrassed to say that Hween had asked for something and so he wrote her a message. The young man introduced Ko Hweong to Kang Kal because the girl wanted to change weapons. So she wondered who made their weapons. The young man thought about the butterfly effect for a long time and therefore began to worry very much. Looked at the young man and as if reading his thoughts asked what he thought about her, because considered the girl a good person. This surprised Sojun. When the young man heard her request, doubts and worries overwhelmed Sojun, but, as said, the girl was a good person. Not a bit of evil intentions, only good deeds. It wasn't the Hween who was drowning in a sea of problems. The young man believed that she could be trusted. The young man was sitting in front of the computer and therefore asked if he was preparing for the final standings. Sojun reported that he knew the venue and therefore offered to check the situation in advance. May their exam go well. Then decided to thank Sojun for helping her countless times and for the wait. The young man joked with that the girl had drunk a lot. But she was serious. Sojun didn't know why he was so grateful, but he assured Yoonhee that they would have time to talk about it after the test. Sojun believed that with their skills, they would pass right away. The young man could not have imagined that this dialogue would lead to events that did not exist before his return to the past. Mount Kunek, the last stage of becoming hunters, clearing an entry-level dungeon in a team with random people. The final score results from the ability to work as a team. Teamwork determines whether they will receive a reward or not. In turn, the size of the reward also depends on the score. The examiner called the participants. Lee Sojun, Ho Man-soo and Kang Di-ho were in the team. Everyone was in place. Now the team has to go to clean up the dungeon. The passage time is 3 hours. Only one type of weapon can be used. Consumables are also available to participants and they had half an hour to discuss before the exam begins. Ho Man-soo is a magician, a rare gift that is valued in the guilds, but the young man did not remember it. But our hero has heard a lot about How Di-ho, a hunter who preferred his own fists to swords or bows. The hero met a hunter who in the future is called the king of hand-to-hand combat. But it didn't matter, the main thing was whether they could all become a team. Before the exam began, it was necessary to decide who was in what positions and discuss the tactics of the battle. Sojun suggested and asked if anyone had any suggestions. They were still busy with their own affairs and absolutely did not listen to the hero. Apparently Sojun was offered to become their tutor. Group D is the 12th team and the start of the overall standings has gone. The system reported that the hero had entered the dungeon and that it was an entry-level quest. Dungeon, to clean up the ant nest on Mount Kunak. That was the name of today's mission that the heroes had to do. Sajin's team sorted out the positions. Ho Minsu is in the rear as he has a large attack radius. Sajin will fight and give instructions from the center. Kang Diho is fighting on the front line. People panic when they first get into the dungeon, and immediately the very first one asked for protection, addressing Sajin. Then the young man explained that they were not here to protect Mansu. The young man shouted about how important he was and that their heads would fly if he died. Kang Diho offered to go without Minsu, and Sajin replied that the two of them were enough for an entry-level dungeon and asked to go already. Minsu, standing at the entrance to the dungeon, did not believe that the guys were really going to go and ran after them, asking them to wait for him. There were a lot of chains on the young man, and Sajin asked to take them off and give them to the observer, because their rattling would give the monsters the location of the team. The young man was afraid that his jewelry could be stolen, because they were very expensive. It was a classic exam life situation where egoists don't think about their team members and their role in it. Standing behind them, the observer reported that the instructions of the leader were mandatory for all team members, and they were required to leave their jewelry outside the dungeon so that in the future they would not be discovered and killed by monsters. Minsu was unhappy and thought that everyone was against him, and they also wanted to give themselves points at his expense. He angered Sajin so much that he concentrated his mana in his legs and turned it against Minsu and taught him a lesson so that the guy stayed on the floor and looked no longer at Sajin, but at his spear in front of his face. Sajin repeated the last time and asked Minsu to take off all the jewelry. Clear and confident movements, with no chance of a quick reaction. The young man accurately calculated the distance to the target. The observer assessed all the actions in the room. He had heard that among the participants there was one who scored the maximum number of points on the individual test in the shortest time, and these rumors were not lying. Sajin walked through the dungeon and thought that for all the long time that they had been here, they had not met a single ant. There were only remnants of moss around, which they ate. Examiners may specifically create atypical situations to assess the resourcefulness of participants. But even so, and then Sajin's thoughts were interrupted by Diho's words that there was something strange ahead. In the dungeon, the young men discovered a chasm. Sajin, kneeling down, had never seen anything like this when cleaning ant nests. An atypical situation would be much easier, the hero thought. Then one of the participants, Minsu, began to fall into the abyss. Sajin asked him not to move and rushed to help, but Minsu was being dragged somewhere, but the guys could not understand what he was talking about. At that moment, a huge ant appeared from the abyss and Minsu asked to save him. In front of them was an ant lion. And unable to hold on to the spear that Sajin Minsu held out, the guy fell straight down, and the guys decided to go straight inside, going down the walls of the abyss. The observer, sitting on the edge, said that the guys could not go there, it was beyond the test. The system said that the young men were the first to enter the secret dungeon. The beginning of a special quest. A secret dungeon. It was necessary to clean up the ant lion's lair. At that moment, they descended right into the very lair. Sajin asked Diho if he had heard about the special notification, and they entered the secret dungeon.